dee da, ya da da dee da da doo. Ba da ba boom ba da da doom ba da 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 do ba da da dee da ya da 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 doo yum ba dum dee. Hello everybody, how are you doing today? Today, of course, is the principles and factors of cruiser design, and I am your under some duress host for this lovely discussion this evening, Dr. Alex Clarke. How you doing? Welcome to Naval History Live. Let's see who we've got to say hello to everyone. Ooh, hello Vision. You got here very quickly. Hello Old Richard. Hello M35 Bendits. Hello Peter Dawson. Hello Frank Spadato. That's starting off with a long question. Frank Spadato, when looking into the history of Bodmer class, they seem to come off as a strategic escorts who never get to see surface action. But more constantly, they are attached to CVG 56, 58, 1, 38.1, and can be missed out on even as AA screens. Both CVGs will never be directly attacked in the Mariners and layered battles. Looking at the use of Model 2, their presence seemed to offer USN a small but special group of ships. They only have 3 at any one time, just like Atlanta's, with 4 at the most, and Alaska's only 2. Is this simply an example of how war works and how fleets must balance their resources, or is this something I'm missing? You're getting there, but specifically on the Baltimores, there is going to be more discussion on them later. There is going to be a lot more discussion on them later. Over 35 Benvids, I'm not commenting. Hello Albazaski, hello Nautical Wolf, hello, not quite on the ration strength. As there appears to be a plethora of Sean's on the site, I've changed my name, but not that anyone cares. Hello, Sean. Not a wolf. When did the term cruiser replace frigates, and why? I can't seem to remember if you said this before. We'll actually be discussing this because you can actually date when cruiser begins. The Royal Navy helpfully does it. Hello, Jonathan Burrow. Hello, 96831. So, what do we think of Russia's peace plan proposal? It's saying we've said something, so we can say we said something. It's that school of diplomacy. It's an interesting gambit. It's certainly an interesting gambit to make. I'm not sure if I was them, I would have gone with that gambit. But it's the gambit they've gone with, and we'll see what happens. So far, it seems to have just annoyed pretty much everyone. But life happens. Life happens, and life is fun. And that is the point of life. If it wasn't fun, we'd all be very upset. Now, I should warn you, there are roughly 30-odd slides. Which means we could be here for a while, but I will tick through when I feel like getting to the end of a slide. I've set them on for a 10-minute maximum, but I doubt anyone will get 10 minutes on each slide. Hello, John Shea. Hello, Stephen Lane. Right, so... Ooh. Old Richard, by NATO's logic, Russia would be justified in allying with Mexico and forward-basing nuclear bombs. Anyone else see the hypocrisy? Well, if Russia wants to, they can, but why would Mexico want to ally with Russia? This is the point. Once you're dealing with these alliances, you're allowed to do that. There is nothing against it. So if Russia wants to ally with Mexico, they can. Mexico would have to choose to ally with them. The fact is, you have to ask yourself, if Russia is such a bad neighbor that these countries next door to them are choosing to ally with with NATO and choosing to join NATO, then that questions how good a neighbor you are. That's not they're being nasty to me. It's we are such a bad neighbor that they would rather get into bed with them, despite all the issues it will probably cause with us, because frankly, even then, that's still better than not being connected. It's basically, we're putting nations into a scenario where the least worst option for them is to join NATO, which they know will upset us, but we're already upset and are being annoying. It's a case of when your foreign policy is really backfiring, because let's be honest, NATO hasn't been doing great guns on the everyone join NATO for many years. In fact, they really haven't been. So countries suddenly saying we want to join NATO, especially when you start talking about Finland and Sweden and these ones, it's basically saying that you've given them a reason to. It's not that they want to join NATO. It's not that they want to particularly sour relations with you even more, but that the relationship is now so sour they have no faith in you, so they're going. And that's the problem. And that's worthwhile discussing because it's principles and factors of cruiser design. Diplomacy is part of it. And that is an issue. Russia's diplomacy has not recently been doing that great when it comes to their neighbors. That's the trouble. When you do invade one of your neighbors, it makes all the other neighbors start to get worried about you. And when you start to develop a reputation for deploying, let's call them little green men, to go and do naughty things dressed in green in your neighbors, then you really start to make those neighbors very, very worried. Even if you don't intend to do it to them, for some reason they don't trust you. But also that you can't really turn around and demand a member group that you're not a member of follow rules you're dictating. It's just not going to work. It's good perhaps for the domestic market, but for the international market, it just makes you sound like well, no one's going to take any notice of it. They're just going to go, well, we don't care. We won't be we're told what to do by you. Especially not when you're Russia and NATO, because let's be honest, NATO was set up, the whole thing was to stand up to the Soviet Union. And Russia is not the Soviet Union, but they're kind of going, you don't do that. And sort of NATO's job as whole thing was to go, we can do what we want to do. We're an alliance of free nations. That's using their that's their sort of marketing anyway. It's mostly true. Hi, Felix B. Hello, Michael Truitt. Hello, GC. Hello, Kurtover. Hello. I'm making modern cruisers. We're making all cruisers. We're doing all cruisers. Let's take a Does HMS Hood break the fundamental rules of cruiser design? Hood is a battle cruiser, which is a variant of cruiser. But it's a very big variant of cruiser. Basically, Russia's peace deal, as I understand it, and I'm saying this in one sentence, so there are people who go back to me and go, that doesn't fit with the nuance. Basically, when you're looking at the Russian deal, it's NATO cannot expand, and in return, we promise to be good people. And these countries which we've been sort of intimidating, we won't do anything more to as long as they don't join NATO. Because they've said they're going to join NATO because of the things you've been doing to them. Oh, it's life. Hello, Andrew Paul. Hello, DG40. Hello, Stephen Richards. Hello, Bruno Waters. Hello, Frank Cusack. Hello, Shane Rogers. Hello, John South. Hello, Colin Cameron. Hello, Darius Rosowski. Hello, Bijan, of course. Hello, Carl Gasberg. M35 bandvids. Language. Little cousins are watching. Ian and Paul Baswick. Hello, Andrew Reynolds. Hello, Minnie Thinking. Hello. Glad your fluffy research assistant is watching you, Mimi. Mine is currently in the house being looked after and made a fuss of. It hasn't been that well recently. Before anyone gets too worried, it's partially both of them their own small fault in that both of them decided to eat an entire pack of frozen sweet corn. To be fair, at the time I wasn't here, so it ain't on me. And they're okay. Let's say they're fine. It's just they've given them both selves bad tummies because apparently frozen sweet corn is not good for your tummy. Good thought. Hello, Frank Spotter. Hello, Dan Freeman. You're writing an essay. Good luck. There is a new emoji. Hello, Matthias Slavic. Hello, Frank Spardo. Hello, Wesley Phillips. Oh, Richard. What class do you say are the last real cruisers? In the USN, we always consider Long Beach even our last cruiser hull. I would pretty much go with them. Although I think the Russians have built some pretty decent cruisers more recently. Jonathan, how do you design a good cruiser in 1930s of beauty? A lot of heavy guns and torpedo launchers. We're probably going with the town class, but we'll get into that in a bit. Karen, that story about the person that did not believe that the UK had aircraft carriers until after World War II, and possibly still doesn't. I was wondering, were they confused by the post-war change to the pennant system? No, they really weren't looking at it in that depth. I'd say many of the pictures are British ships, but that's because they're being used as illustrative. So, earlier I was asked, when did cruisers come to be? Well, rather specific on cruiser design in that the Royal Navy dates cruiser design from 1888. And really, ships become cruisers and it becomes more of a recognized design in sort of 1870s, 1880s. You must remember that HMS Warrior is a frigate, and there are lots of ironclad frigates which then become cruisers at a certain point. Naval materialism, 1902 to 1914, naval requirements, 1914 to 1921, and political requirements, 1921 to present. Please note there is the lovely question mark. Hello. Oh, chicken. Hello. You okay? You can say hello to everyone. All right. I will wear the corgi one another day.
Hello, everyone. I just came to say hello. I'm Fluffy.
Run.
I'm also after his chicken.
No eating sweet corn on chicken. Go. Right. Which cruisers broke the fundamental rules of cruiser design? The fact that they think there are Knights of Clarke, there aren't really fundamental rules of cruiser design. There is such a wide variety of cruisers because there aren't fundamental designs of cruiser designs, really. That's right. Build the cruiser of carbon fiber and titanium fiber composite if you want to have a good large cruiser. No. Hello, Shumi. Hello, Frank Kuzak. Do you have any further book recommendations on the Royal Navy in a Napoleonic Age senior service? I have a fair number, but we'll get into that another time. Hello, and Cash. Hope you're well. And right. Please stop that. They have no choice but to join NATO. The thing with joining NATO started in the last millennium. It's not just it's related to internal politics. Yes and no. Trust me. As someone who's knows as many Finns as I do, joining NATO is not really something they're particularly keen on because they like their neutrality. They like being neutral, but it happens. Right. Oh, well, let's see. Yes, that was a fluffy research assistant. Yeah. All right. So. I have to say I'm slightly worried to eat this. If I get ill at all, my sister's just cooked chicken. It looks okay. So, the cruiser age is an interesting period, but what you always have to remember is that ships have been doing the cruiser role a lot longer than there were ships called the cruiser. In fact, the cruiser role has outdated the cruiser many, many times. In that, we're sort of talking a period. You can argue the cruiser, its high point is about the 1870s to about 1960s. So you're dealing with about 90 years. They maybe get to 100 years if you include some of the Tigers and go into the full 1970s range. But the cruiser role has been around since, well, Romans in galleys were doing the cruiser role. The Chinese were doing the cruiser role at various points. The cruiser role covers everything from waging war to promoting peace, which is a nice way of putting it because it goes with PP. There's also a factor here that this is actually a line from a proper document, a proper government document, that is going to be given to politicians, and even the Navy admits that naval requirements ends in 1921, question mark. Hmm. Hmm. Oh, it's a very good book. Do I have any further book recommendations? I have lots of book recommendations, but I'm going to get to those later today in terms of book recommendations. He was after the chicken, so I presume it's okay. That's it. Would the Admiral class, Anson, Howe, and Romney be members of their own subclass of the Admiral class? Not really. They would have been their own sort of class. Probably it would have been the Hood class, and instead of being the Admiral class as they were originally, they would have been the Hood class and the Howe and the Anson class or Howe class, depending on which one was built first. Lots of people affected the materialism, but lots of people affected cruiser design. But really, there were some pragmatic things. So, for example, Lord Hill Norton, and I usually use him because he's a fairly decent admiral and a fairly decent writer. So, his definition of a cruiser. The designation cruiser indicates her principal task, which has always been long-range patrolling, and from this requirement flows her chief attribute of endurance. A cruiser must also be large enough to keep the sea in any weather, fast enough to be the eyes of the fleets, to scout and to shadow, to overhaul the enemy in a chase, and powerful enough to overwhelm that enemy with her guns, though not to slog it out in line of battle against heavily armed ships. A maritime island nation like Britain, with vital worldwide interests, has always been peculiarly vulnerable to the guerre de course, economic warfare, the attack on her merchant shipping on which her life depends. Thus, the cruiser became the commerce destroyers as well as commerce defenders, the weapon of both the weaker naval power and the stronger. In the Royal Navy, the cruiser has to fulfill both functions, performing her traditional task of protecting the country's merchant marine from the interference and at the same time denying the use of the sea to shipping of her enemies. To predominantly land power, cruiser warfare was a useful secondary form of offensive. To a maritime power, it was often, and of necessity, defensive. Now, the interesting question is, why did they change from calling frigates to calling them cruisers? And this comes back to the constructors' materialism and Ellswick. To an extent, they went with cruiser because it sounded cooler. Hello, Duke42. Good morning. Why do you always do your live stream right as I'm going to work? I got my book just in time for Christmas. Cool! Hope you're enjoying it. So, this pretty much covers much of what a cruiser does. But it doesn't really cover it. Lord Hill Norton is a good admiral. He is a good writer. But he misses out all the duties and the fact that most of these the cruiser has to do both in peace and war. The fact is, the cruiser's role and the cruising role for a navy doesn't stop when the war does. It doesn't start when the war does. It's ongoing. It's perpetual. I'm trying to avoid singing a certain Shania Twain song now. And this has to be factored into your design. When you're designing cruisers, you are not just designing an individual ship. You're not just designing a class. You're looking at an entire fleet, an entire role of duties. New student, Dogtism and naval architecture. The iron is just showing off how well read they are if they're writing memos like that. Mm-hmm. It was. Mm-hmm. So, this, of course, is the new emoji. I'm advertising it quite regularly. It's for members. I'm still so shocked, I have to admit, as a historian, every time I realise that I have patrons who are quite so generous as they all are, that I get super chats because you guys apparently decide you're going to pay to ask me questions when it's naval history. I love talking about it, and that people become members of the channel, and pretty much the only benefits they get is emojis and badges, because I don't do. I have some friends who do, well, when I say friends, acquaintances, colleagues who do, on not history but on other topics, do far more stuff with members only on sort of their channel, and I just, that just isn't me, because I like to have the wider, the everyone involved chat thing, and I like that, and I don't like sort of dividing things up and making things released for members first and then for everyone else. So yeah, I still get shocked at the people do that. But anyway, here's the new emoji. It is, of course, made with the help of the wonderful Bree Jeffrey. So please say thank you to Bree. Will it be available as a Christmas ornament? That you'd have to ask Bree. Mm-hmm. Code 85. So something useful in war, but economical enough for peacetime. Pretty much. What do you, so all ship designs eventually come down to, what do you need it to do? What do you want it to do? What can you afford it to do? And what can you not afford it not to do? Which is usually the point at which people go going to me and go, Alex, 1, 2, and 4 of those are the same question, so you shouldn't be asking them. And I go, wrong. As a rule, if you don't start out your design with that, you're never going to work out what that's going to be. And you're certainly not going to be able to deal with, provide a sensible answer to this. Well, speaking of signing books, as arrived today, I have from Pen and Sword a whole load of sheets, which I apparently sign, and then I return to their signature plates, and then I return to them. And they're going to be sent out to a certain very nice gentleman called Tucky, who you all know, who some of you will know from World of Warships. And apparently, they're going to be they're talking about doing something with some signed copies. So I have to get those signed this week. But that should mean that there's some signed copies going out to Central Europe and various other places. That's good. I wanted to be able to go over land on giant spider legs, but I feel the answer to questions 1 and 3 would be negative on that front. Right then. So what do you need it to? What is the question 20? What do you need it to? Well, there's the human geography, and then there's the physical geography. Human geography are things like, do you have a nation dependent on maritime trade? Because if you do, you're going to need a cruiser. Or something to cruise around securing that maritime trade. How large an exclusive economic zone do you have? Yeah. If you have one, you need to be present in it. How big a population do you have? Ooh. How big an economy do you have? If you have a big economy and there is a hiccup in the supply chains, you're going to get into trouble. Supply chain issues, as we've seen with COVID, as we saw when the Suez Canal was blocked, as we've seen in when the Somalian pirates were doing their thing, cause problems. Where does your population live? That's a factor. Does your population all live on the coast? Because that's going to have a factor in what you do. If your population all lives inland, and only a tiny population lives on the coast, then you might be less worried. What does your population expect from you? Here is the classic issue. At many times in history, we have had people go, but I don't want to be the world's policeman. Or the population goes, whenever they're voting, they don't vote to be the world's policeman. But they also then turn around, the same population that doesn't want to pay to be the world's policeman, turns around to their government and expects them to do something when something goes wrong in the world. For many years, well, basically from about 1815 onwards, when the thing went wrong in the world, what turned up was a Royal Navy warship. Usually a frigate. Sometimes something larger if it needed to go, hello. What's going on today then? The trouble is, doing those sort of duties is not good for your warfighting capabilities because you have to exercise maximum restraint at all times. You have to be focused on being something which is a presence, an image. One of the problems we get when we go through history is if you're looking at the late Victorian Navy, people go, and I'll rightly go, it's stilted, it's very rigid, and all these things, and they're very obsessed with spit and polish, which is all correct and is all the problem, but is also caused by something. It's caused by the needing the police. You need to have the image of being the police when you show up. You need to have the capability to project yourself as the police when you show up. That requires something from you. That requires you to be able to do the things you need to do, and it requires you to look a certain way. You need to keep rigid and tight control of your personnel. They cannot afford to be provoked. You cannot afford to have them acting out of turn. The trouble is, as the US Navy would today tell you, doing those sorts of duties is not good. Even though it's necessary in peacetime, it's not good for necessarily providing the ability for you to fight in wartime. And again, if we go to use the example of the Royal Navy in the interwar period, as I've explained many times, where do the Royal Navy park their very aggressive officers to maintain them? They park them in destroyers, and they keep them there. And they use their cruisers for doing diplomacy and presence missions and doing all that around the world, but they cycle the crews through often enough and junior officers through often enough into destroyers and into the cruisers so that they keep the fighting edge. But the trouble is, if you're looking at the late Victorian Navy, it's pretty much sloops, cruisers, and battleships. Where do you put the fighting edge? There isn't enough force for it to be a fighting edge. The fact is, the Royal Navy, if you consider destroyers, they have a huge number of them, and they require officers. And that keeps them going. That keeps their fighting edge going. But your population will often expect you to turn up, but they all don't want to pay for it. This is, again, where a cruiser comes in and cost. All right, let's answer the question before I get into the physical geography. Is Frank's what it is 4 a double negative? Yes, it is. Our counterface. Hello, Paul from Chicago. Thank you. As I said elsewhere, you're doing a year of the cruiser quite well. Really looking forward to the review of the early scouts in particular. Thanks. It's a pleasure. I like doing them. 1968 run. 1815 to 1922 was the Royal Navy, and 1945 to now is the US Navy. I would say about 1950 to now is the US Navy. I'd say 1945 to 50 is everyone trying to figure out how to deal with post-World War II. I'd say pretty much everyone is in the same boat at that point. Hello, Larry Schneider. Hello, the Shaw. And Vintage Castry. Hello, Henry Milner. Don't worry. Anyway. Physical geography. Are you in the South Atlantic? This is going to affect your ship design. Are you in the South Atlantic? Because if you're operating in the South Atlantic, the ship you're going to design is going to be completely different than if you're operating in the Mediterranean. This is another reason why I laugh whenever people say, oh, you know what, that ship operating for that navy is really good. They should copy it. We should just build them. And I go, it is good. You want to take that hull down around the Falklands? Anyone? No? Didn't think so. It's the question we get into with the Canadian vessels that are the sort of the Harry the Wolf class the Canadians are building. They are massive for their size and duties. It would appear at first glance, if you're comparing them to an Australian patrol boat. But an Australian patrol boat doesn't have to go down into the Antarctic waters that often. Well, in fact, never does. Larger ships do. The Type 26 will probably have to cover that role, which is another reason why they procured the Type 26. But the Harry the Wolf class are going to have to operate in Arctic waters, and storms can come up quickly. And you don't want to be there if they do, if you're in a small little ship. It's a factor in your design. Hello, 640. Vintage Castry. I got to sit with Rack and Naval earlier, discussing the automotive tech advancements of the late 19th and 20th century, the effect naval design. Fun stuff. Sounds cool. Are you a nation with lots of disparate territories? Are you Indonesia, Philippines? Are you Britain? Are you France? Are you America? Are you a solid lump? But there again, America isn't a solid lump because they have Guam, they have Hawaii, they have Alaska. What kind of temperatures do you expect? It's a legitimate question. Are you going to be operating in the cold? In which case, you're going to have to pack in a load of insulation. Are you going to be operating in the heat? In which case, you're going to have to pack in a lot of cooling. Are you going to be running between both? In which case, you're going to have to try and figure out how to balance it. And then it's the final question. Yes, you might have a big easy. Does it actually contain anything worthwhile getting? Can you get to it viably? All these things have a factor. All these things have an effect. But as you can tell if you look at keep up to date in the news on the South China Sea, the East China Sea, the Baltic, parts of Africa, well, the African coast, some areas in the Caribbean and South America, having an exclusive economic zone is a line on paper. If you aren't able to enforce that, then you don't have an exclusive economic zone. If you are able to enforce it, that means you have to have the ships to do so. Again, that's traditionally a cruiser role, and the ship you don't choose to do it might not be a cruiser, but it'll be doing the cruising role. What hull are we not wanting to take around the Falklands and why? Well, someone was suggesting to me that really we should buy. What was it? Ooh. It was the really small Italian OPV design, which is basically designed for Mediterranean. It's an absolutely beautiful boat. I have no qualms about it being a beautiful boat, but it's high speed and all these flowy lines and lovely and gorgeous, but it's not what Britain needs for a patrol boat in the Falklands or even reaching out to most of the coast of the UK. It could possibly do okay in the Channel. But that's the reality. The tidal range and everything you're dealing with means that won't work. Martin Peacock, you know that the people suggesting just using someone else's ships would take them everywhere. Rarity wouldn't you? Yeah. A week vintage car history. I would love to do something similar sometime. Hello, Alexander Sam. Yeah. Let's see. RMs always have to do so much more seakeeping than its competitors. Not generally acknowledged. Yeah, that usually is a factor in RM design, which affects what you're building into them. Hello, Thomas Edver. Alexander Simon, Zumwalt, is it a humongous waste of money or just a massive one? Actually, Zumwalt, as I've said several times, is actually not a waste of money. It's a waste of the hull is sensible. What's gone wrong is mostly the American procurement system has managed to muck it up. It's kind of like how do I put it? The LCS is a great idea wrecked by hulls which don't fit the role you wanted to do because they're so obsessed with speed. And the Zumwalt is a great ship wrecked by an obsession with with equipment which wasn't ready yet. So you've got basically two sides of the same coin. What do you want to do? Well, do you want to do anti-submarine work? And believe it or not, cruisers have been used for ASW work. There was a suggestion of ASDIC and sonar for many, many cruisers, and depth charges and all sorts of things for cruisers. Yeah. Anti-surface work, anti-aircraft, literal combat operations, disaster relief, intelligence gathering, diplomatic missions, presence missions, maritime support, security missions. All these things are things you might want to do. And the question is always, what do you want it to do? What do you need it to do? What do you want it to do? These are the operational missions. What you need it to do is the geographical requirements you need to operate it. Jones, do you think the navies didn't think enough about the effects of the Washington Naval Treaty on cruisers and the use? I think the navies did. I don't think the politicians did. There are many different gun cruiser weapons, but honestly, I'm a big fan of the 6-inch and I'm a big fan of the 9.2-inch. Not as big a fan of the 8-inch. Sujin 90. Could you design a standard cruiser for Russia, given its vast geographical differences among the four fleets? Again, there you go. You have an interesting problem. You have four large areas which need different times operating. You can argue that the high north on both sides, to an extent, is similar. But the Baltic, ooh, versus the Atlantic, versus the Black Sea, versus the Pacific, you can understand why they might go with 4 different classes. Downstream, does the North Sea requirements of the RN allow an ability to operate in nasty waters? To an extent, but then it's the trouble is the RN requires them to operate in the South Atlantic and the high North Atlantic. Who are the Poodle Avengers? Well, yeah. I've also got the Corgi ones. Oh, you don't know. You know, they're quite good to have. Nice to why do we need it when we have the River Class OPVs? That was my other point. But they felt these were cheaper and better than the Rivers. Right. Alistair Shaw, is there I-Star roles in the Navy? Yes. Intelligence gathering is critical. Pretty much every ship in the Royal Navy is fitted with a level of electronic warfare capability and listening capability. If you're near a warship, presume it can listen into you. So, when you explain to us the Type 83 needs to be a reissue of the Town class, but with 25 inches and a flight deck midget. Ooh. Maybe something. I don't mind the Expo. It can work on certain ship designs. And okay. What is a TAFRA? Trainee assistant, fluffy research assistant. Yes, that is the Corgi. Is the TAFRA. The Poodle is the fluffy research assistant. Next build prompts will be next week because we're recording it tomorrow. Actually, what I should ask is, do all ships do I-Star in the task group? Or is it devolved to a particular ship? All ships do it. Because here's the point. All ships do it. All ships report. We have something on this bearing. We have something on this bearing. We have something on this bearing. And if you're in the flagship, let's say you're in the carrier, let's just put it in the carrier for easy, there might well be an intelligence cell who will then overlay the bearings of the information received automatically, because it will be transmitted data-wise straight to the carrier to put together into one picture. Put it together and go, oh, there's our target. Send a helicopter, we think there's a submarine there. Or fighters, engage. Or launch missiles, there's an enemy surface ship. That is how it works. And it's always been the same. When you're talking about hunting down the Bismarck or talking about all these, the surface ships were using all their systems to listen. And they're all over, they're sharing the information. Right, Cash, my wife is very jealous of the trainee assistant. Very good fluff. Right. Now, again, if you're all sitting there, you'll probably notice that this is the other class of cruiser which the Russians built at the same time as they were building the Kirovs. Amazing. So the Kirovs were for the North Atlantic and the Pacific. These, I would argue, are more Black Sea, to an extent Baltic, but also able to support the larger cruiser as in the North Atlantic and the Pacific. So these are sort of flagship vessels for the Baltic and the Black Sea, whereas the Kirovs are, what can I say? The Kirovs are the flagship vessels for the other regions. Think of it as the difference between a battle cruiser, a heavy cruiser, and light cruisers. Now, what can you afford it to do? There are a few scenarios you can go into this one. But the ultimate one I tend to bring up with, and yeah, that's that chicken. I'm not sure about the rest of it. Stafford, if you're watching, I'm opening your after eights. I've been good. They've survived this long. Sitting in front of me. Basically, the Slavas are gorgeous, but pretty much the Soviet Navy came up to the same problem as the Royal Navy did. That, okay, you can put all your money in one brilliant warship, and it's amazing, it's gorgeous, it's supreme. But the trouble is, you can't afford to be just in one place at one time. If you're the Royal Navy, you have to be in roughly, and they worked this out, 25 places at one time. Now, thanks to the law of large numbers and the way scalability works, they needed roughly 70 cruisers to be in those 25 places at a time. With forward deployment and all sorts of things going on, they needed roughly 70 cruisers. That means that you can't afford to spend the same amount of money as a country which possibly only needs 4 or 5 cruisers can on per ship. Your economy is probably a lot bigger if you actually need that many cruisers. But you still can't afford to do an obscene amount on each individual ship. They have to cumulatively be of value. A good example of this, when we start talking about it, is the Panzerschiff. Okay? Deutschland class. Now, I might accuse them of being horrendously inefficient designs which focus on 11-inch gun because they're taking on a pre-dreadnought layout of having the guns fore and aft. Instead of thinking out, we've been through the whole dreadnought era, we can do something more efficient, and all sorts of things. But they are status units that Germany's pursuing. But then you turn around, you have people writing articles. Oh, the Royal Navy should have invested in similar ships. The Royal Navy would never invested in similar ships as the Panzerschiff. Why? Well, where do they need to use them? Well, do they need them for their status unit? No, they have battleships and battle cruisers. They have aircraft carriers. They don't need that as their status unit. Okay. Do they need it as their cruisers? Well, actually, that thing's not going to keep up with the fastest thing, so no. Is it going to do reconnaissance? No, it's too expensive. They need more than just that. Eventually, you get down to the point of one person's cruiser which fits them is not going to fit another Navy's cruiser. We will go in this from the US Navy and the Royal Navy. That's who the two navies I've picked to do the analysis between at the end. The Royal Navy, the US Navy, the different cruisers, what do they want from them? What do they need from them? It has an impact. And, this cruiser might fit you, but you might, want a cruiser with similar capabilities, but cheaper, so you can build 4 of them. Because this nation can afford to have 5 cruisers and have only a couple available at one time. This nation needs to have 4 available at any one time, and so therefore it probably needs at least 12. It has an impact. Hello, Desert Foxo. Good doctor needs to get himself a Rottweiler. I have a standard poodle and a corgi. Trust me, between them, the Rottweiler would not enjoy that conversation. Jones, range is commonly given for ships, but it seems that endurance is the ability to remain out of docks Seems pretty important for the crew role. Pretty much. There is a reason why Lord Hilton Norton uses the word endurance rather than range. He's a naval officer. He picks his words with care. Finished cartridge. Most of the criteria you speak of apply to early cars as well, each according to their class intended use. Sure. Will the trainee fluffy research assistant become a fluffy research assistant? Yes. We say when. Well, it's probably going to be about the time at which Raleigh receives his promotion to senior fluffy research assistant, the SFRA. Which, if he continues to work hard and publish as he is doing, and continues to apply himself, could happen in between 5 to 10 years' time. It's an academic household. Man. Code 85. Given that the space time between the Sendais and the Arganos, how does this affect the IJN light forces, and what would design fill a role? Personally, I'd scale up a Fubuki and other Iron Brewer. Thank you. Thank you, Cody 85. Well, honestly, the Japanese are constantly in a cruiser problem, because for both them and the USN, what are they preparing to do? They're preparing to fight across the Pacific. What's the kind of cruiser war they're going to need? Well, the cruisers are going to need to do scout roll, and they're going to need to fight with the destroyers and cover them. But honestly, they're light forces, and the main battle's going to be decided by the battleships. Surely they both know that. It's rather interesting. It's the cruiser role, in many ways, is both driven by the Royal Navy and driven by the Royal Navy in a direction which neither the Japanese or the Americans want to go. So they keep adapting it and trying to adapt it to fit their needs. But I'm honestly surprised the IJN didn't turn around at London and say, we'd like to exchange our light cruiser tonnage for heavy cruisers. Like the Royal Navy's exchanging their heavy cruisers for light cruiser tonnage. I'm surprised they didn't. Hi, Nook. Hi, Camry. Where do you come down pre-Vistal helicopter cruisers like Moscow and Vittorio Veneto? Oh, they're always fun to have. And even if you put your money into one beautiful service unit, and your opponent puts one, if not two torpedoes in your beautiful, all your money, service unit goes. Yeah, pretty much. Scott, when talking about what can be afforded, it seems maintenance costs are often not considered as much as it should be. Apparently, the plan is having issues funding maintenance. That doesn't surprise me. It's easy to build shipyards. It's more difficult to build maintenance yards and docks for that, because they take up the same space. And if you've grown your shipyard space, have you grown your infrastructure spaces dramatically? And the upper leadership military are just like other high-level sources, and that they do need to be made feel uncomfortable regularly to do better work. Might not make them pleasant. Yes and no. Existing vessels and finding dry docks and facilities to conduct maintenance as voltages keep demanding. They used to build more hulls. Yeah, that always causes fun. Got over. Hello. The Iron seems to get stuck in 1930s. Needed the numbers, gave it this per ship, but also combat capability against the USN or IJN cruiser. They had ways around it, and I'll get into that. Well, no, the fluffy research assistant emeritus. That's a role which Mozart managed to achieve, but that took many years to get to. Mozart was the previous poodle. Oh. What can you not afford it not to do? This one causes issues for many people. Most of the people are not me. Because it's quite simple. It comes back to the first list, but it makes you think again about the first list after you've gone through the financial prioritization realms of what can we afford it to do. And then you go, well, what can we not afford it not to do? The Royal Navy, and the American Navy to an extent, and the Canadian Navy certainly, cannot afford to have ships which cannot operate in the high North Atlantic. They can't. They just can't. And thank you, Paul, for the super chat. They can't afford for it not to do that. So that's going to affect hull shape. This is why I'm very surprised at the design chosen for the graphic of the new destroyer announcements of that the Americans put out. I think it was today, maybe yesterday, for the Arleigh-Burke replacement, because they've gone for a Razor conventional bow, and every message I've got and every report I've had is how successful the tumble home has been for the Zumwalt. And if you're considering the depth fin hull, especially that they're looking for to get the speed they want and the stability they want and the depth for the vertical launch hypersonic missile system, the tumble home Zumwalt would seem the sensible choice to go for. But there's the problem that the Zumwalt is perceived as a failure. Somehow the LCS is not. LCS's hull form, which is pretty much what they've scaled up to an extent, is not, because if you look at it, it's very similar to a Freedom in proportions, is not being perceived as a failure, but the Zumwalt is. And the Zumwalt didn't fail. The AGS say it failed. The Zumwalt didn't. The railgun system is what failed. And the government withdrew funding from the advanced gun system. Not the Zumwalt. Thanks, let's see. Was the USN duped into building the Alaskas? Not really. Because the Alaskas actually make sense if you consider them the proper heavy cruisers. I keep making this point. I think the Alaskas are where heavy cruisers would have ended up, naturally, by the 1940s, if there hadn't been the treaties. Are the container ships and the future convoy ships in the next war? They're probably going to be in the convoys, yes. Okay. Alternatively, if you're operating, or looking at operating, in the Mediterranean or Baltic, and you are not factoring in a very strong air defense anti-missile configuration, you better be paying hefty premiums elsewhere to compensate. And this goes for the South China Sea as well. If you're planning on operating in those areas and you're building a surface ship and you are not factoring in as much AA as you possibly can, before anyone asks about the water, it's Highland Spring, which is appropriate for me, then you're in trouble. You're in a lot of trouble. Immediately. Code 85, order bearing, North Pacific Sea, North Pacific, yes. To be fair, to actually compare the combat capabilities of cruisers, Frank Spotted, is it fair to actually compare the combat capabilities of cruisers, especially if they seem to be more concerned with not the other guy's cruisers as often? Yeah, honestly, cruisers, you can compare the combat capabilities, but as this is something which I know I rabbit on about a lot, but I'm going to keep going on about it. Paul, you've brought up Hastings. He's wrong. That's all. Okay. So, no, I'm not a fan of the 8-inch gun. No, I don't. No, I do keep going about the counties being large, light cruisers and all these things. But we're just going to say he's wrong. Okay. There's a reason why I am not not reviewing Hastings' book on this channel. The point is, cruisers are designed for your own needs. And I've made this point in the Long Patrol, which will come out tomorrow. You can, to an extent, battleships, they're all designed for roughly the same thing. Fighting a battle against other battleships. They're able to be compared. Destroyers. Launching a lot of torpedoes, attacking aggressively the enemy ships. They're pretty much able to be compared, to an extent. Cruisers, well, the cruiser the Royal Navy will design will be very different to the cruiser the US Navy will design, very different to the cruiser the Japanese Navy design, because the cruiser is the ultimate example of what are our geostrategic considerations, what are our factors, what are the things we have to think about. And geostrategy, of course, is global strategy. Intergeostrategy is interplanetary strategy. Interstellar strategy is between suns. And you can go on, but we'll leave that to one side. Free Dawson, the Alaskas compared to Grass Bay. No, that's an insult to the Alaskas. To be... that's good. You don't need to bring up either names. You really don't. As Sigyn 90 pointed out, those cruisers would have been useful if the Ranger Marina had decided to continue its sortie. That's the point. It's an 8-inch gun. This is useless in this fight. Yes, but look at the other battles. There have been lots of other battles in the Mediterranean. At which point, they were very useful. Sorry. This after 8 minutes tried to get away. It's terrible. Man, people, I understand your point, really, Alaskas, but I kind of feel the yards would have been better building something else. Had other navies been building something similar, fine. I agree. I think actually myself, hopefully I got the right one. Yeah, I did. I think myself, if the Alaskas had been built in, so they've been available 1942, 1943, they would have a very different reputation than they do now. Paul, if I'm manning an 8-inch gun, there's nothing to shoot, and I'm most likely to die from torpedo or aerial delivered bomb, I'd be pretty miffed. Potentially. But the thing is, you're manning the 8-inch gun because if an enemy 8-inch cruiser shows up, that's what you're there for. Let's hear it. So is the Type 82 is it a destroyer or a cruiser? It's a destroyer, like the Daring class, the County class, the Tribal class, and the Battle class were destroyers. Okay. Series 19. The point is, you can't guarantee the enemy won't unleash their full expanse of their capabilities. The Ranger Marina sought against Pedestal and only turned back because of British deception. Justin, the USS Des Moines fan club has entered the chat. The Alaskas may not have a better reputation if hit by torpedoes. Well, they had fairly good torpedo defense systems, so they might have survived that one. But there again, it would depend. Again, it would depend on the captains given. This is the trouble. Cruisers get a reputation for the ships, but honestly, it's the captains which affect it. When we're talking about the cruiser battle, which involved which, as I said, the Americans lost against the Japanese, which I did a video about not long ago. The problem wasn't the cruisers. It was the captains in charge of them who kept going in a straight line when there were torpedoes coming at them. That is the problem. The cruiser captain who diverted his ship and moved around, yeah, survived, intact, fine. This is the problem. Sometimes the ships get a bad reputation, but it's not the ships which are at fault. It's the system which builds up the command crews and the personnel for them. Now, the US Navy does a lot of good in World War II. They have a lot of good officers. They also have some right stinkers, as does the Royal Navy. A lot of good officers have some right stinkers. The French Navy, we don't really know much about because they don't get to do the operations that long. The German Navy seems to be overly burdened with stinkers when it comes to their surface fleet. They have some very good ones, but they seem to be all executive officer or occasionally captain, and then the officers above them seem to be stinkers. It's a problem. Nice run. So really the light and heavy cruisers replaced lost hood and repulse. So, as you can see, this is the new graphic, which is, again, talk about more in the long patrol. But so how does this all factor into cruisers? Because we've done warship design in a sort of generic level at this point. Trade interdiction, trade protection, presence, diplomacy, reconnaissance, sea control, fighting other cruisers, fighting smaller ships, deterrent. All the factors. Frank Asada, Dr. C, USS Honolulu. That's why I didn't say the battle. Yep, Honolulu. I couldn't remember, but she was a good ship. Adfam, given Tikarongas and possibly Type 55s are now basically carrier squads, then is that the cruiser role today? That certainly is a cruiser role today. But let's be honest, that would come under fighting other cruisers, fighting smaller ships, deterrent, sea control, trade protection, operational protection, reconnaissance, all these things. Hello, Cody85. Thanks for becoming a supporter. So, it's all about the money, money, money. Yeah, this is the money, 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 money. We don't want to make the world sing. We just want to be paid for everything. Yeah, sorry. The point is, Scott's great game, the trade interdiction of this plan, is exactly what it's all about. And the ships used were doing the cruising role. That's what the blockade was. It's a cruising role. It's what cruisers do. They're used to enforce a blockade. And here you go. Here you have the classic example. You have 3 cruisers in the Royal Navy, which on paper do not match anywhere near the Deutschland class. They don't match them. And yet 3 of them turn up, and the Deutschland goes, ouch, ends up going to port. It doesn't sink any one of them. This is the point. It doesn't sink. It also is very careful to try and keep as far out of torpedo range of them as it possibly can. One of the things that's often underplayed in the movie, but was definitely a factor from discussions I read of the thinking of both the British commanders and the British captains and of Langsdorff, was the reality that these ships carry a lot of torpedoes and they will use them quite happily. And that is a problem. Hello, Stephen Ryder. Thank you. Thank you for becoming a supporter. They are fun like that. British Biker Relief Foundation. Would you consider doing any look at HMS Matabali at all? I've got a close family connection, but really can only find the normal online limited information and love to have your insight. Well, Andy, for starters, there is a section in my book, which I probably have put out there. But yeah, there you go. There's also another wonderful book, which it's basically been out of print for so long, and no one can seem to get it back to work, which I now can't find, but it was behind me not that long ago. There it is. The Tribals by Martin Bryce, which is not that far up there. Both good books, and as for Matabali, I will probably do a video about her at some point. I'll probably do videos about all the Tribals at some point. It's probably going to be the year of the Destroyers, which might be next year. Sorry, I might do it this year. I might do some this year. Now, trade protection. Although Abfab has just said all those factors are now destroyer functions. Well, no, they're the cruising role still. The ship doing them might not be a cruiser. Remember what I said at the beginning. Their cruising role has been around for a lot longer than they were cruisers. You've got to detach the cruiser from the cruising role. Okay? The cruiser is built to do the cruising role, or part of it. But not necessarily will a cruiser do all the cruising role. The torpedoes are a big factor in this one, in the Battle of the River Plate. They're a big scary factor for the Germans. And when it gets there, it's taken out. It's in Montevideo Harbor. If it gets out, it's going to face them and it's going to run into their torpedoes. If it gets past them, Renown is coming along. Then there's Ark Royal behind that. If it stays in harbour and stays afloat, Ark Royal is coming. There was, as I've said before when I did the River Plate River Plate videos, there was never any chance of the Graf Spee getting out of Montevideo harbour. She was going to be sunk within 24 hours, whatever happened. She was either going to be taken out by a crew, she was either going to be taken out at sea by these ships or by Renown, or she was going to be taken out in harbour by HMS Ark Royal. There was no chance. The Royal Navy wasn't going to muck around. And again, people usually go back to me and go, well, she was in a neutral harbour, she was a neutral ship. Surely they wouldn't attack a neutral power. Yeah, they went into the... They actually went straight into Norway not that much later to get back prisoners from the Altmark who had been captured by Graf Spee. Yeah, they'll do that to Uruguay. They'll apologise for it afterwards, but they'll do it. Paul, have you listened to the Lions Led by Donkeys podcast on the sinking of USS Indianapolis? Interesting perspective. Not yet, no. Cody 85. PCNC, problem in chair, not in cruiser. Yep. That's a good one. That was terrible singing. I am a historian, not a singer. Let's see. All right. Paul Westwick, shattering enemy capital ships was a significant role played by British cruisers in World War II. Yes, it was. That comes under a reconnaissance duty. Which ships carry a lot of torpedoes? Ajax and Achilles. Justine, they kept trying to make torpedo runs on Graf Spee, which made life miserable for it when it was trying to fight back. Yes, it did. It was just terrible. They were behaving like destroyers. Gosh, what was the Deutschland protected against caliber-wise? It all depends on range, as we discussed a few months ago when we were talking about the Japanese Congos and the American heavy cruisers and their response to them. And the reason the heavy cruisers were trying to charge to get closer to the Congos was because they believed that if they get to a close enough range, they can penetrate the armor, and it turned out they could. It's the same with the Deutschland class, in that, yeah, they have armor as long as they can keep everyone at range, but even 6-inch shells can penetrate some of the unarmored, some of the lesser armored areas at close enough range, and probably could have penetrated even some of the more heavily armored areas if they got close enough. Your armor is always, this is a protection for you at a relative amount of range. At a certain amount of range, this offers this much protection. Vision, would USS Salem have done better than the Graf Spee ship which was portrayed in the film? Probably Salem would have done better. Adverb, somehow the cruising role makes me feel the Jay McDonald singing didn't help. Sorry about that. Does got invade Uruguay and then ask how much export product has to be bought at 25% a month for the problem to go away. No, it would not be, invade. No, just the aircraft would fly over, probably at night. Was ship handling the difference between the survival and loss of the UK battlecruiser Jutland? Ships that handled their ammo carefully survive while fast-firing ships are lost? Not really. It's more luck, sadly enough. Let's see, Adam Marianas, why does the USN keep the Baltimores back with the CVs and the other CAs up front with the battleships? Because the Baltimores can protect the carriers. That's what they're there for. I'll get into that in a second when I'm talking about the Baltimores. Choosing, as your battleships battle replate videos know to re-range, the Ajax and Achilles were closing to just over 3,000 yards at points, which is literally point blank. Yep. Jeff Yeller, one Leander versus Grass Bay. Probably the Grass Bay wins. But that's the point. So let's look at the image matters as much as reality. Now, people are going to sit there and go, well, you've just gone for Royal Navy again. Well, there is a reason I've gone for the Royal Navy, because these are four cruisers, four levels of cruisers the Royal Navy had at the time. And honestly, I was tempted to put in the Leanders, I was tempted to put in the Town class, and basically put them all in and go, these are the ships the Royal Navy is using for presence and diplomacy. Let's see what works and let's see what doesn't. Cruiser. Built destroyer. It's got presence. It's got power. I know exactly. I have a daily up-to-date spreadsheet with how much it would cost me to go and spend 6 days with her. How much the flights to Toronto cost. Although some did suggest I try flying to New York instead. And then and how much the car to rent and all that thing costs. I've got that all worked out. But no, HMCS Haida. Cruiser built destroyer. County class. Status. 8-inch heavy cruiser. Now, the interesting question is often put up is the lighter cruisers. We've got a Dido and we've got an Aerofuser, which are built on a very similar hull to a very similar spec. However, this one has 10 5.25-inch guns and is in many ways a destroyer-built cruiser in that it's so packed full of weapons. And the Aerofuser has 6 6-inch guns. Now, you would sit there looking at, if you're thinking about it from a pure military fighting perspective, this must be the more impressive ship. The Dido, it's got 10 5.2 inches. Impressive. But actually, in diplomacy terms, often the Aerofusers did a lot better, and the reports that come back from the Foreign Office, etc., state they're a lot better and are far more positive. And the reason is, if you notice when you look at all three of these ships, for all three of those designs, they are a sort of understated elegance. They are, how to put it, if they were bodyguards, these three would have concealed carry. This one is basically going, I have an M16. And we're all going, you're holding it wrong. This is the point. These are understated elegance. They are still powerful. They are still carry. They have a lot of firepower. But the thing is, they look like you are... It's going to sound strange. They have firepower, but because they have space, they look like you are confident enough that you have the space. This is the point. These project confidence. This projects power. This is good for diplomacy. This is good for war fighting. There is a difference. Admittedly, with this design, I would like to take it out and go, here, have a little bit more beam and a little bit more length, and we'll sort out the engines a bit, and we'll give you a little bit more stability, but also a little bit higher speed and longer range. Now we've got a very cool ship, but that's what it's there for. This is a, we are fighting a war, we need to build this now. And that's what they do. Kenrick, in the motion movie of the Battle River Plate, one of the Scarring cruisers jettisons its depth charges before shooting started. How can effect with depth charges on cruisers in World War II? Depth charges were disturbingly common on cruisers in World War II. Effective, well, do you want to do anti-submarine warfare in a cruiser? Martin Peacock, awfully sorry, old chap. Our swordfish got lost on a training exercise and the torpedoes fell off. No idea they weren't training torpedoes. More likely skewer dive bombers. Precision strikes. Paul Bestwick. HMS Ajax and Achilles. I assume their captains were ex-destroyer captains. It didn't hurt that Commodore Harwood was the gentleman who had at one point written, so if we are going to use destroyers as cruisers, does that mean I can use cruisers as destroyers? When he'd been in charge of, well, one of the Royal... he'd been on the staff at Greenwich, doing some of the work there. And yes, there were quite a few ex-destroyer men in the cruisers. As said, the Royal Navy's methodology of keeping the fighting edge had been to basically tell the destroyers to go off and become insanely aggressive, and the cruisers do the peacetime role, and they fought between the two. They'd keep a balanced force. Was the Hood's removal of submerged launch torpedoes and the planned removal of the above water torpedoes a sign that Hood's role was changing? Not really. It was a sign that he had better things to do with the weight. Sure, Mike. Oh, yeah, I see the year of the cruiser. We are covering the French ship that literally have 1 inch of belt armor. Ah. And the John of Morris. So in December we can expect a video on the La Fantastique class. I haven't announced what the December videos are going to be. Super 90. Could the skewers penetrate the Grass Bay with 500-pound sat bombs? They could have. Thus, there would have been probably a squadron of their men and possibly a squadron of swordfish lining up on one ship. See much rapid radar fire control and rapid fire 8-inch would have been devastating those cruisers would have played. That it would have been. Right, let's see. Apparently the RN was building 29 cruisers during the war. Yeah, broadly speaking, there would have been. There is a difference. Whenever you sort of start talking about these things and looking at it in World War II and World War One and the scenario, you go losses. Ah, yes, that's terrible. The losses at Jutland, terrible. The Royal Navy replaces them. The Germans, think about how long it takes them to get back. Losses are replaced. Right, eyes of the fleet. In fact, when does a cruiser killer stop being just a bigger cruiser? That is a whole other question. Basically, every time you build a bigger cruiser, you have to decide whether you built a cruiser big enough it justifies a new name. That's the problem with a cruiser. So, since Age of Sail, it's been the eyes of the fleet. It's been part of their duty. You can't do sea control if you can't see the sea. If you can't monitor it. Now, this is where you get into interesting things, because the US Navy, the Royal Navy, and the IJN, Imperial Japanese Navy, all go for aircraft operating from their cruisers in different fashions. The British build box hangars. The reason they build box hangars is because they need somewhere safe to store the aircraft when they're in the North Atlantic, when they're in the South Atlantic, when they're in those vicious seas. The Americans and Japanese, who are thinking about operating in the Pacific, which tends to be, it can be very rough, but tends to be, as a rule, calmer, especially in certain areas. They tend to position their things differently. One of the discussions we'll get into is the town classes. Of course, they're designed originally and this is one of the beautiful things about them. One of the original concepts for them has them carrying as many as 7 aircraft. Okay, the idea was you'd have 3 fully constructed aircraft, 2 signaling hangars, 1 on the catapult ready to go, and you'd have 4 either stowed, partially assembled, or completely disassembled that you could rebuild. You could build in spare parts on the ship. Eventually decided it was better to actually just carry the spare parts so they could completely rebuild the ones they carried, and they only carried 2. But, they worked through variations on it to work it out as the idea. Because why are they doing that, though? Well, it's because of the same issue that the Graf Spee has, which leads to the Battle of River Plate. It's able to avoid the Royal Navy cruisers as long as its spotter is able to spot them long before the Royal Navy's spotters spot them. Spot the Graf Spee. And they're able to keep away. The thing is, the Royal Navy, this is one of the problems for the Royal Navy, they don't have enough town-class cruisers. And they're off manning, well, in this particular period, where are the town-class cruisers? Ooh, well, HMS Liverpool is off looking at the Japanese. A large chunk of them are sitting in the North Atlantic, trying to put up a barrier there. And that's really where the RN's first team for sea control cruisers are. And they're the ones with the best aviation facilities of any of the RN cruisers. The counties, well, they have some. But appropriately, it's the Leanders, which are the ones down in Harwood's group. And they do have some aircraft, and they do manage to get them airborne, and they do manage to spot and provide information for their strike. But how you're going to range your aircraft facilities affects very much what you think of it. Do you think of your aircraft facilities as for reconnaissance or for sea control? If it's for sea control, then your aircraft become far more important. They become something you maintain. The Japanese are thinking about the Alpha Strike, as are the Americans. The Americans using their carrier-based aircraft for reconnaissance. So for the Alpha Strike, so therefore the cruiser reconnaissance is sort of backup secondary reconnaissance. Still useful, but it's secondary. The IJN, of course, have focused everything on their cruiser reconnaissance. And everything's built around that idea. But for the RN, they are looking at a scenario where they are in stations all around the world, where they have 7 carriers in 1939. Woohoo! But they also realize they might not. They want to try and do multi-carrier operations. That's a big part of RN doctrine. I know it's quite surprising. They don't really get to do it. They do some in Norway. They do some multi-carrier operations in Norway, which often gets forgotten. And they do it. But the trouble is they lose Courageous and Glorious quite early on, so that cuts out the multi-carrier operations. Taranto, originally planned as a multi-carrier operation. It was supposed to involve Eagle as well as Illustrious. The thing is, the RN was planning on having a multi-carrier operations, and one of the other options they like to do in these things was have aircraft from the cruisers, which occasionally would supplement them in that role in reconnaissance, but could then land on the carrier. That's always fun. Don't do that often. The cruiser's role, though, could well be operating in an area where they don't have a carrier to support them. This is pre-escort carrier, all those things. In which case, they need to be able to maintain their aircraft. Hence the ugly box hanger. Thompson, Infinite. What would the RN have for X tonnage? Candies, towns, leaders, or a refuser? If they could pick, they'd probably want something based on the towns by late 1930s. Towns are probably their favourites. Hi, Stafford. I hope you realise that I've been eating your after eights. Thank you for sending them again. Nice again. The Cassine and Pensacola were protection against anything more than a stiff breeze. Can be described as optimistic. So, Squad, if you're a cruiser and you can't see the sea, you've got problems. Unless I designed your cruiser and you can see giant mechanical spider legs. Hello, Richard Order. Pete Dawson, is that a walrus? That is a walrus. Sure, Mac, everyone has a good day sometimes. Sam was looking at the shipyards in Belfast during World War II. They built a huge number of ships in a short period. Were aircraft carriers relatively simple to build? Not really, but there was one important consideration versus a battleship. They required a lot less armor, and a lot less armor plate. And armor plate was annoying and difficult to supply. And as Sudran90 pointed out, they also don't have the main gun turrets, which are also a big bottleneck. But they do have the fuel integration systems, which are very fiddly. I'm not reading that out, John Snuff. Smaller ships and other cruisers. Yeah. Fighting time. If you're engaging smaller ships, you often want fast, rapid-firing guns. If you're engaging other cruisers, well, you need to balance that fire with something which can actually punch them out. Which is one of the reasons why you get the debates of the 6-inch or the 8-inch, or the 9.2, or the 5-inch. It's on the spectrum, because cruiser rolls is a spectrum. And depending on which point on that spectrum you pick you want a ship for, the guns might make sense. Steam Rider, fuel integration systems? Yeah. If you're ever on a carrier, especially in the Royal Navy carriers in the interwar period and World War II, the fuel is designed to the fuel system is designed to automatically drain the fuel back into the tanks, so it's not sitting in the lines if they're hit. The British are obsessed with the fuel management and fuel integration systems, which go throughout the ship and mean that fuel for the aircraft can be taken from wherever they on the tanks to where they needed to fill up the aircraft, but also will not stay in the tubes. And it's really difficult to get right. The British are, when they get the first escort carriers from America, the first one has a big accident. And let's put it this way, it's never officially blamed on the fuel integration system. But after that, the British, every time they get an escort carrier, basically rip it apart and replace the fuel integration system. Because the American one they just don't trust. And let's put it this way as well, the Americans end up asking the British for the schematics for their system. So that suggests it's a very difficult bit of kit to get right. It's kind of like the tension wire used for dropping torpedoes from the Swordfish to make sure they belly flop rather than nosedive. If you get it right, you've got a war-winning system on your hands. If you muck it up, you've got a problem. And it's the same with the fuel integration system and all these things. And fab, were the hippos meant to out-county a county? Never sure what their role was meant to be. Honestly, there's been an interesting debate going on about that on the hippos on Twitter today, which Marcus Faulkner's been taking a part in. And I have to say, the hippos are hippos. Seriously, someone gets an idea in their head, and basically, one of the problems for the Germans was that the naval treaty the British got them to sign basically trapped them into doing how do I put this? Most of the trouble with the hippos comes from the fact that when they're designing them, no one really wants them, and they've been trapped into a treaty system, which means they can't go asymmetric to the British. They have to do a full fleet, and Hitler really wants that. But life is life. And the hippos try. The hippos really do try. Mostly my patients. Hello, Ivan Terrible. Nice to hear, and that's the loss of HMS Dasher in the Moray Firth. So, Mike, don't get started. I just don't understand how you can fit 6,000 tons of extra stuff on a warship and not see any benefit from it. Oh, Sean. Seriously, there are so many ship designs I could take you around where we can talk about an extra 3,000 tons for that. 6,000 tons, quite easily. And the deterrence. Okay. So here is the reality. Whilst it's not a foregone conclusion, the odds are in a fight with a battleship or a battlecruiser, a cruiser, especially if alone, will lose. It will do. However, and this brings me into something which has been in a lot of debate with the counties, especially with the counties and coming underneath them. People going, oh, but there's no point building the heavy cruiser with 9.2-inch guns and 15 to 20,000 tons because it'll never be able to win against a battlecruiser. No, but it's not supposed to. It's supposed to be enough of a threat that the battlecruiser has to back down. That battlecruiser decides it's better to go elsewhere for another threat, because the damage done by torpedoes and guns might be enough that, frankly, the next time they can't run away. And the other point is, whilst 15 to 20,000 tons is a lot when you're talking against building, when you're building, an Invincible class battlecruiser of roughly 20,000 tons, when you're building battlecruisers of the scale of HMS Hood, which is 47,000 tons, well, suddenly 20,000 tons makes a lot of sense. Let's see. So, it's the fun times. Pretty much, the British didn't send every ship they had in the Pacific in 44 and 45, only best of them. US ships, they weren't there in the thousands. Steve, seriously. I think you're overestimating US Navy production a little bit. And the British were sending not just the best, but pretty much every ship they had that was up to full capability. But they also had fairly large number of ships going around Europe and Mediterranean doing the duties they needed there. Is that why Hitler was okay sending Lutzow to Russia? Yes, because frankly, they weren't that great. Okay, come on, Alex. Let's hear about 6,000 tons of additional weight while lacking benefit. Well, basically, it comes when you start designing yourself inefficiently. Um, this, of course, is an Italian heavy cruiser. They are quite efficient designs and quite beautiful. Starting with the Deutschland class, the German heavy ships just get more and more inefficient. The Scharnhorst and Eisenhower are probably the most efficient of designs they produce. And even them, you could probably cut about 4,500 tons from without too much difficulty. Not because they're bad designs, but because they're inefficient designs. The Deutschland class, the example I tend to give is I go, look at it. It's a pre-dreadnought. It's got big guns in the center. It's got big guns at each end, single turret at each end, and it's got its secondaries along the sides. It's a pre-dreadnought. That is exactly what it is. It's a two-turret pre-dreadnought. They could have gone for 3 twin 11-inch guns. Still had the 6 11-inch guns, but they could have gone for 3 twin turrets. That could have been sensible. They could have gone for an all-forward arrangement with their 2 treble 11-inch guns, and then push their secondaries out and sort of be more efficient in magazine layout, in engine layout, probably got more speed, all sorts of things they could have done. But they didn't. Because honestly, it's not just German engineering it hasn't been building, it's that the Germans were already conservative to begin with. This is one of the problems people forget when they're looking at the First World War. They presume the Germans are actually pushing things forward when they're not. The Germans are the most reactionary builders of anyone. As I explained in the Dreadnought Naval Race videos, the Royal Navy's in a numbers race with Germany, but they're in a tech race with Italy and America. And this is one of the reasons why I find it funny when people go, oh, the post-First World War naval race between the British and the Americans, that could lead to war. The British have been in a naval race with the Americans since about 1904. It's been a tech race the entire time. They're fine with it, so are the Americans. It's not leading to war. If it had been going to lead to war, the time it would have led to war would have been during the First World War, when the British the British annoyed the Americans on several occasions. We didn't do quite as much damage to Anglo-American relations as the Germans did to their relations with America, but we weren't exactly polite about some of the things we did. So, not all warships, and they certainly were at least 2,000. Well, okay, if you're including troop transports, merchant ships, all the supply convoys, I still don't think you're getting to 2,000. I think you're probably getting in the best part of above 1,500. But I think it also depends on what area you're including in the Pacific. And also, if you're going to go for the full wider area, you have to include the British Pacific Fleet and the Eastern Fleet. Because you have to remember the RN's also Britain's furnishing the Eastern Fleet and the Pacific Fleet. The Eastern Fleet are fighting in the Indian Ocean and supporting operations in there to deal with the Japanese there in Singapore, Malaya, and that peninsula, as well as the ones in the Pacific. So, if once you start widening out numbers, you then have to start widening out numbers for everyone. All right. Um, people always forget that commerce raiders, by nature role, cannot afford any damage. They cannot engage cruisers in straight fight as the risks are too high, even if they can't lose. Exactly. So an RN cruiser doesn't need to be able to sink a commerce raider, a raiding battle cruiser, just damage enough to mission kill it. Pretty much. Because if it achieves a mission kill, they're in trouble. Astro, what's an example of the efficiency in the hippers, the engine layout, and the way the engines are supported? Tank 26. 3 twin turrets is less tonnage efficient than 2 triple turrets from an engineering standpoint. True, but then put your 2 triple turrets forward. And you might say then, okay, one shell could perhaps mission kill both, but this way you can have your magazine all forward and you can get a far more efficient design. There are cases to be made for the argument, but you know. Rowan Cash, never thought of the Hobbit battleship as a pre-dreadnought before, but now you mention it. There were 16,000 tons, but no better than anything else that was 10,000 tons compliant. As a shot, yeah, pretty much. That's the problem with the hippers. They are slightly better, but they're not better by enough for 16,000 tons. The RN being in a tech race with Italy, and Italy with Austro-Hungary, who had the least innovative orientation, and yet honestly produced some of the most innovative designs. I would argue Austro-Hungarians. Anok, RN non-politeness caused Admiral King's fury to it. I thought of just being beaty. Excellent. That's the time. Dr. Clarke, what sort of dogs do you have? A poodle and a corgi. Benjamin, the RM played a big role in policing liberated countries in the charity string and right after World War II, from Greece to Indonesia. Cruisers played a big role here, far from the fighting with the Axis. Yeah, they did. Re more efficient Panther Chief. A, B triple turrets for the triples are needed for the Scharnhorst. Mm-hmm. True. Right. So, now we've considered the factors, let's consider some actual examples. I'm going to do the town class, the Chester class, the town class, the Brooklyn class, the city class, and the constellation class. It's fun times. Seawish, at its peak, yes, it was operating 6,768 ships on VJ Day. But that doesn't mean they're all in the Pacific. The US Navy was operating ships in the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, all around the world. They were not all. They even had some in the Eastern Fleet's area of operations. This is the point. Yes, I would. Yeah. And there's quite a lot of those ships are being operated on the coast. You have to include things like Wolverine, which is operating on the Great Lakes. You said in the Pacific, and you were saying more than 2,000. I don't think so, from my reading. That's sure. So, are we saying that the hobbits are the R class? Not fast, not the best, but there where you need them. Well, to an extent, the R class battleships could do a lot of damage when they need to. So, town class. Town class is their official name in every book I've read. Anyway, so the town class in 1910. City class is the Type 26. They've upgraded the name from town to city. Shumack, from just a pure paper look, the only thing the hippos have is some extra deck armor. Oh, nope, I misread the sheet. The New Orleans have better deck armor. That doesn't surprise me. If the RN needed to build a ship of the same tonnage as Deutschland to fight it, how'd they do it? Not that a 1-on-1 is an ideal fight. They were building a ship to fight the Deutschlands. They would call a renown. So, town class. 25 knots top speed. Carried a 6-inch gun forward in their first version, 6-inch aft, and a 4-inch along the side. Subsequent variations had 6-inch guns all along them. They carried 18-inch torpedoes for the first variants, then 21-inch torpedoes. They are fun. And basically, the Royal Navy is going, we've been building scout cruisers. Yeah. We need something that can do the scout cruiser role. Yeah. But it needs to also be able to do the trade protection role. Yeah. So, they carry some 6-inch guns because that can do the trade protection role against merchant raiders. Yes, it can. Because a 6-inch gun is enough to poke a very large hole in a merchant ship. And the 4-inch guns are more than enough to saturate fire any destroyers. Later on, when they go for a whole set of 6-inch guns, that's because they might actually have to fight other cruisers. And they want to be able to blast them in 6-inch fire. The torpedoes they carry, they're their deterrent for any enemy battleships or larger cruisers which come after them. Because here's your point. I can wipe out that town class. Admittedly, it's going to be going at 25 knots, so it's got a 4-knot speed advantage on me if I'm a battleship. There are some battle cruisers which can outpace her, but usually not by more than a couple of knots. And the thing is, if she's maneuvering fast and coming towards me at full speed, she might get into torpedo range. And that might cause me a lot of damage. Or I can ignore that convoy and go after something bigger. The Royal Navy does like the 4 stacks at this point. And it does work. It's a good design. But I would say if you're looking for something for the presence mission, compare it to this. Now, this is the better warship. If I had to pick to be on one in a fight, I'd be on the town class. But for image, when it's coming in, the 3 vessels of the Chester class are excellent. Admittedly, though, they can only do 24 knots, so they're slightly slower than the town class, but they are from 1907. The technology is moving a lot quickly in this point. Poor Chester class. They're rather cute in their own way. And again, 4 stacks because it's quite an efficient approach at the time with the engines available. Then we have the town class from World War II. Now, why have I compared them to the Brooklyn class? Well, because here you go. Now, both of these have triple 6-inch turrets. Admittedly, Edinburgh and Belfast very nearly had quadruple 6-inch turrets, which have been the RN going, okay, so you won up to us and went for 15 guns when we had 12. Now we got 16. What you gonna do? But leaving that to one side and the obvious petty sort of naval race, technology race going on there, what's the thing you first notice about these ships? Well, yes, they have a Nelson and Rodney style front. They are a fighting ship. They are a combat ship. and they have the aircraft down back. Why? Because the aircraft are very much tertiary to their role. Their combat duties are important. The aircraft are something that they've got out of the way because they've got out the after for if they need them for operational terms, but they're not really something which is a primary concern. Town class. Well, for the town class, the aircraft are in the center in a huge hangar because they can carry them. Because these are about sea control. These are about fighting the battle for sea control. These are about maintaining sea control. These had 12 6-inch guns. In a straight-up fight, 12 versus 15. Yeah, probably the 15 wins. Who knows? But the thing is, they would never get into a straight-up fight. Because if they get into a straight-up fight, this one has gone wrong. This one has mucked something up. This one has had something go wrong. And that is the reality. These classes are both built by two navies. They are both 6-inch gun cruisers. They both have triple turrets. Those two navies are the most powerful navies in the world at the time of their construction. But they have different needs. The Royal Navy has squadrons based all around the world in stations, maintaining presence, policing the empire, policing the seas. This is a maritime security and presence cruiser. This is a cruiser which has got fighting capability, but it's got it built around the diplomatic skills as well. The US Navy doesn't. The US Navy emphasizes on the battle fleet and the forthcoming war, which they think they're going to have in the Pacific with the Japan. They've got heavy cruisers for the diplomatic missions. They're using capital ships occasionally for diplomatic missions, but really their heavy cruisers take the lead. Their light cruisers are for fighting. And that reflects the design differentials. What is your emphasis? And guess what I'm going to say? Neither is wrong, because a Brooklyn, as gorgeous as it might be, wouldn't fit the Royal Navy's requirements. And a town, as gorgeous as it might be, wouldn't fit the US Navy's requirements. They wouldn't. So, does that mean one ship's better than the other? No. It means one ship is better for the Royal Navy and one ship is better for the US Navy. And that's how it should be. And cruisers are the area where you will see this most, where there is the most divergence because of the different geostrategic aims. Alistair Shaw, elect. Now, what again? You can ask, why does in many ways, why did the town class lose out on the 5th turret, which they could have had, for the aviation facilities? Because it's about sea control. Why do they have it in the center of the ship? Because that's the most stable place to put the catapult. Because that's the best for aviation operations. Because aviation is an important part of their abilities. Because despite the fact they're not being in the role of Japanese air cruisers with aviation, they're still aviation is critical for them. But for the Brooklyn, it's far more sensible to stick it on the rear because it's far safer. This is sensible because of their roles. This is sensible because of their roles. The US Navy, would never consider doing what the Royal Navy did with theirs. The Royal Navy wouldn't consider doing what the US Navy did because of the difference in their duties, because of the difference in their missions. And this is the most important thing. I cannot emphasize it enough. And I know we spend a lot of time with people playing top trumps, and I know there's a lot of discussions which go down to it, but in the end, it isn't that way. That's a great one, except design limits killed that idea, but what Warships Goliath shows us what the quad turret will be like. Be fun. I have a feeling, though, if the Royal Navy did get the quad turret and produced a 16-gun town class, I just have this feeling the Americans produce a 20-gun Super Brooklyn. I just know it would happen. Vision 90. Churchill had all sorts of weird ideas. Dandrian, Brooklyn designed more for the Pacific War rather than the more global side of things for the RN Town class. True. And it was sensible on the Town class. I can argue on the KGVs I wouldn't like it myself. So the point about Churchill and why I'm saying it's wrong is, A, it didn't create actually a problem in the deck armor because actually they had the deck armor over it and that didn't matter. But also the point that you have to remember is it makes sense for the cruisers to have this, but honestly the KGVs having the aviation facilities they'd had was arguably unnecessary, and we could have saved a lot of weight and a lot of space on those ships by not doing it. There again, we could have gone for 15-inch guns and been sensible. Steve, I've been meaning to ask you about this one. You keep saying the US Navy would forget to mount the fourth turret at the stern. I'm not sure what you're referring to, because if you're referring to the fact that counties had a cut-down system with 3 turrets instead of 4, I wasn't forgetting that was a design decision to try and speed up production because turrets take so long to build. But I honestly, no. Towns versus Brooklands. Brooklands didn't have torpedoes either. No, that's the other thing you have to remember with the town class. Brooklands might have the extra 6-inch guns, but the towns bring torpedoes. Cunningham, 90. Cunningham writes all sorts of things, but he does write that about the Gloucester's loss. And then he finds out that the Gloucester and her sister and the other ship sent with her were sent out with low anti-aircraft ammunition because everyone forgot to check how much AA ammunition they had on them before sending them out on their own. And he decided it wasn't really a fault of the design, it was a fault of the admiral in charge, which is why he gave him a big kicking. The towns would find the enemy, turn to the Brooklyn and say, sick 'em. Possibly they just gang up together. That's good. Having rear-mounted aviation on a ship in the North Sea sounds like a good way to get rid of flights of spotter aircraft. It was. Frank Spanner, Dr. C, was the role of the Brooklyn different from the rest of the USN cruise line? Yes and no. To an extent, the Brooklyn class were, I would argue, supposed to back up the destroyers far more. The Brooklyns were supposed to basically bring the heavy metal behind the destroyers and make sure that the Japanese light cruisers, etc., didn't manage to destroy destroyers when they were going in for their torpedo attack. Which is another reason why the Brooklyns didn't have their own torpedoes, because they were supposed to be operating with the destroyers who would have bring them. Zoomish, arrow fuses. Steve, the arrow fuser was designed with 3 twin turrets because they were trying to make a small cruiser. I think I've been over this and done a video on the arrow fusers, but if I have to explain it again, I will do. The arrow fusers are designed with 3 turrets because the Royal Navy's trying to experiment to see how small an effective cruiser they can make. So they go with 3 twin turrets. They do make a very effective cruiser, but they decide to go for the towns afterwards. and then they go sort of. Then basically they try the smallest effective cruiser they can build. Then they do the biggest light cruiser they can build, and then they settle on the crown colonies, which are sort of use those lessons. And they're effective cruisers, but they've got 6 guns, but they do really really good stuff in the Mediterranean and in the North Sea and in off Norway. So they certainly earn their stripes for World War Two. Steve Windish, I don't. Steve, you are misunderstanding it and being quite silly, honestly. It's an effective cruiser. It's got 6-inch guns. Yes. Okay. So you're gonna say that's not as many as others have, but it still has torpedoes, and they do excellent duties in World War II. They take out destroyers, they take out enemy cruisers, they take out merchant ships. They do what they're supposed to. Take care, Roland. Have fun. Desert Foxer, did the Aerofuser Dido class have a similar role in mind when designed? No, the Didos were basically designed as air defense cruisers, and they're making this. They're seeing how small an effective cruiser hull they can make, and that hull is used as the basis for the Dido design. But as I said before, the Dido design should have been slightly bigger, in my mind, to have better stability for its 10 guns. They could have done better. Our fusels, though, they're good cruisers. And as Siege 90 points out, Enterprise and Emerald had the same broadside as our refuser. You've had 6-inch guns around for a while as a broadside. It's a small scenario, a small gun, but it works. It's, again, how do I put this? Would I want an Aerofuser if I was fighting in the Pacific? No. Would I want an Aerofuser if I was fighting in the Mediterranean? Yes, especially at night fights. And if I was fighting in the Norwegian fjords? Yes, because it's smaller and maneuverable. It'll probably win the fight against the bigger cruiser in those narrow spaces. Because in those fights, they're going to get close, and it's going to be in torpedo range. And the thing is, I can build 3 or 4 Aerofusers for the cost of every one of your cruisers. And so, yeah, you might take out the Aerofuser, but I have 3 more. How many more cruisers do you have? So, Aerofusers are about building up numbers. Excuse me, Foxy. What have you done now? You can't get stop blocked anymore. I put in a freaking ramp for you. I have got to get that fox a map, or possibly a compass. Okay. For example, let's see, what was the terrible use of an RN cruiser in World War Two? It didn't come to mind. There were a few RN cruisers which were used badly in World War Two. That's good. Are you sure Stephen is just fishing for reaction? I'm fairly sure he is. The trouble is, the problem is that I come up with across many people who actually do believe that. And so I tend to respond because just in case they watch and I've ignored. And they go, oh, Dr. Clarke agrees with me. No, he doesn't. Sean Kermack, they settle on the Crown Colonies, which are towns with slight redesign and are repackaged with an honest 2,000 tons of weight owing. Honest. Yeah. Tom saying, are refusers. The Germans would switch their Königsberg for them one for one if they could. If they could. But I think, honestly, the refusers would take out a few Königsbergs before the Germans even managed to get anything in. Hmm. Steve, also the crew numbers for the refuser class are lower. You delete a turret, you delete a lot of crew. You've come up with the cost of crew is critically important in peacetime. I can build more cruisers for the cost. Ignores that because the crew numbers are not that much lower. The capability is, it is dramatically lower because you've lost a turret. A turret is a huge number of crew. You have to remember it's all a thing. Oh yeah, Steve is more often than not trolling, but you know yeah. The biggest usages of crew on interwar ship and World War II ship are the engine rooms followed by each of the turrets. Again, Steve, before you start making these little trolling comments, go and look up the refusers. They did win the gunfights. Again, I've done videos about that. Please go watch them. And let's start off with some bonuses. Ooh, the Absalom class. Now, these are rather cute modern ships, which of course are called frigates, not cruisers. But there again, frigates have been doing the cruising role for a long time. They're fleet flagships. That sounds pretty cruisery. They are their number one diplomatic ship. They tend to coordinate the other ships in operations, and they run around the world and are very much the presence and the emphasis of the Danish Navy. I'd say they're just cool. I like the Absalom class. They are pretty cruisery in their roles and duties. You know, the Danish needed something which was more than just a support ship, more than just could put troops ashore. They need to be multi-role and capable, but they need to also have size and impact. And one of the things you have to say when you look at the Absalom class is they do have size and impact. Because they've combined all the functions into this ship, it turns up and it's a case of, oh, it's a warship. Oh, there's troops coming off it. Oh, there's that. It's an impact. Steam Rider, is there a good resource for estimating crew needs of hypothetical designs? Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts has a fairly good crew roster suggestion system. There are a few other systems which try that. Steve, the reason I think it is when you're trolling me rather than asking questions is when you start using emojis, because usually that means you are, and also because there are certain topics where I know you will troll. There are other topics where you don't. Um, Thanks, Honor. Was the 6-inch gun performance usage much different between the navies? Yeah, some navies do get their 6-inch guns to fire slightly better than the others. Honestly, the Royal Navy and the US Navy 6-inch guns tend to seem to produce a lot more firepower than their counterparts from the IJN or the German Navy. However, I do think the honest answer for the people who manage to overwork their 6-inch guns most tends to go to the Ranger Marina, who alternatively are some of the most sporadic firers to some of the most aggressive firers when they have a 6-inch gun. The thing is, the Ranger Marina have a problem in that most of their 6-inch cruiser designs are absolutely atrocious for fighting other ships because they do have paper thin armor. Yes, Leander, 570. Our refusal, 500. Those are the peacetime numbers. From CJ90. And that's peacetime reduction of 70. There's a Fox, though. How much of an effect did the loss of 2/3 of battle cruisers have on the RN's cruisers? It removed the 15-inch that would take care of raiders and other more capable cruisers, which could force less favorable fights. Yes, it would have had an impact if they'd still been facing if there'd been still the raiders around. But if you think about it, they've also got more 14-inch fast battleships in service, i.e. the King George V class, and there aren't the surface for it. By the time when Hood goes, so does Bismarck. Yes, you lose Repulse and you lose Prince of Wales at the same time, which is annoying. But by that point, the Germans are looking at their large surface raiders are pretty heavily damaged, and there are enough towns, there are enough counties, there are enough of the King George V's around to back them up. And plus, you've moved to a sort of more carrier-based scenario. So you have the carrier strength as well. I think you're slightly biased, Juicy Fusion. Adfab, Absalom class, how much does modularity Stanflex help the cruiser roll? It's a tremendous part of it. It's about getting the most out of that hull and that space. The fact is that thanks to Stanflex, this ship can be modified around a lot more quickly. Honestly, here is the point I would have made. If the US Navy had been wanting a modular ship and frigate back in when and actually been looking at that back when they started the LCS project, they should have gone to the Danish Navy, probably should have bought Stanflex and learnt from it. If this is what they don't, because they are the technological peer leaders and all these things, and they are, pushing that. But probably the sensible thing would have been to go buy Stanflex, build a decent frigate design, and use Stanflex as it to get it, and maybe actually even base it off the Absalom class. And that would have given them a literal combat ship. It would have given them a frigate. And you could have modified it, played around the design, and given yourself something pretty darn capable. Steve, again, you are now straw manning me because at no point have I ever said the British cruisers were perfect in any way. What I've said is the RFUs were logical, built, and were effective. They weren't perfect. Honestly, if I'd been building a 6-gun cruiser and I'd had the treble turret in development, I think I would have gone with 3 treble 6-inches. But they go with 3 double, or they go with the doubles. That's fine. And it works for what they're built for. But there are problems when you look at the designs. The Amphion class has issues. They're supposedly the heavy Leanders, but they have problems. The Town class, I love them. But honestly, and I said this in one of the versions of the Long Patrol, from a warfighting perspective, the Brooklyns have a longer range. The Brooklyns have more firepower. From a warfighting perspective, the Royal Navy exchanges those things for slightly better armor and the aviation facilities, and a slightly lighter hull, lighter ship overall. Those are compromises, and they fit the RN's need, but it's a tough one. And that's the other thing I keep trying to say. There is no such thing as a perfect ship. There is a question of whether that ship is perfect for you. So the question of the Arafusers, etc., is whether they are the cruisers which the Royal Navy needed them to be, which they were. So they are good ships. The question of the Brooklyns isn't are they the perfect ship, it's are they the cruisers the US Navy needed them to be. They were, which means they're great ships. I would argue my problem with the Deutschland class is that they weren't the ships that the German Navy needed them to be. They weren't the ships that Germany needed them to be, and therefore that's my problem with them. I have issues with some of the Royal Navy designs. I would argue that the way the C's and D's were used in World War II and are upgraded in World War II didn't provide the ships they needed to be. And the Dido class, again, I'm regularly quite critical of them because I don't think they are the ships the Royal Navy needed them to be. They built them because of various limitations, that's constrained by various limitations. But if they had actually done it with a little bit more of a clean sheet, I think they'd have given them a greater length and slightly better beam, and they would have been far better. There's also part of me which sits there and goes, should they have had the 4.5-inch gun rather than the 5.25-inch gun? And would that have saved things? Well, it would have certainly been interesting if you put all that into 4.5 over the 5-inch, but 5.25-inch. But the trouble is, anything below 5 inches is a destroyer gun, and they wanted the fastest firing cruiser gun they could put in that, which was a 5.25-inch, because that's above the level for destroyers. The Americans just went with a 5-inch. I would argue the Americans were sensible on that one. Mm-hmm. Brent Paulus, where is the best place to ask build questions, and is there a typical response time? We have an email address, but also you can just tweet at us. Usually one of us responds. In fact, Type 51 is a modified Danish design. It is. It's a modified Ivor Hewlett. The RN builds cruisers to fill the roles they need and accepts some compromises. The USN builds cruisers to fill the roles they need and accepts different compromises. And also builds the Alaskas. Yes, and the RN would have liked to build the 9.2-inch cruisers. I have a feeling if the RN had built 3 or 4 9.2-inch cruisers, then those would have been kept rather than Tiger and probably Vanguard, etc. And we could have had 9.2 inches survive until 1982. No, 70 crew is a lot to warrant the drop of the numbers, and that's quite useful. That's the peacetime, and you didn't prove there were thousands of ships in the US Pacific. You said that they had over 6,000 overall. Depends what you consider as a Pacific. The perfect one is the one that doesn't sink. Dev Squad, if the RN was going to build a British version of the Alaska class, what would it look like? The RN would have built something. It would have. The RN Supercruiser was going to be about probably about 18,000 tons and have 9.2-inch guns. And I think last I checked, it was going to have 9.2-inch guns. This is Foxen. I've heard it claimed that Tribal could have filled the role of Leanders or refusers if more had been built instead. Is there any merit to this? They certainly could have jumped up, and they did do a lot of work. It was quite often the Tribals and the Didos and the Arafusers worked together a lot. Leanders less so, but the Arafusers they certainly did work with. If you built more of them, you could have done that, and that it's one of those things. The RN built the treaty limitation they were, then they ordered more by the were built ordered by the Royal Australian Navy and the Royal Canadian Navy, so they were building those, which we're going to fill in. And then they had the battle class, and then they had the daring class. So they had them. Sure. Why 9.2 inch? Well, because for the RN, the 9.2 inch for the British super heavy cruisers would have represented the fastest firing of the largest fast firing cruiser gun. Because once you're getting the 12 in 10 getting 10-inch and above, you're getting into rates of fire which are battleship rates of fire, and the British prefer to put more shells in the air. Hmm. I'm going to see. Do any of the cruisers for the Axis actually fill the roles they're built for? What actually were the roles supposed to be? Honestly, the Italian cruisers do, and the Japanese cruisers do, to an extent. The German cruisers don't. The Japanese and the Italian cruisers fulfill their roles quite well. The German ones, they don't really have a concept for what they need them for. And thanks to the combination of the Anglo-German Naval Treaty and Hitler, the German Navy is focused on building ships which are theoretically peers of their British counterparts. Shooting 19. Italian heavy cruisers also function quite well as pseudo battle units. Yeah, they do. Anyway, City class. They're frigates, but they're going to have to act in the cruiser role. This is the reality. The cruiser name might not be around as much for ships, but the cruiser role certainly is. So let's see, what are they designed for it? Well, as Glasgow shows here, their lines, they are designed for unstated elegance. They're designed to be shaped like they are. They are... How can I put this? Things are proportioned out. They are quite well armed, as we have been over in the various videos about the Type 26. They are quite well organized. But they are not, especially in the British case, overburdened. They have space for diplomacy. They have space to entertain. They have space to do their job of presence, of discussions. Because, let's face it, the Type 26s are probably going to be the heavy unit that shows up. Britain will have a Type 31 and Type 32, maybe another vessels, forward deployed. They will be the ones doing the regular, hello, here's the British flag, would you like some tea? That stuff. When there's an issue and you need to give slightly more emphasis, the vessel that will probably show up will probably be a Type 26 because they're going to be more numerous. So they'll show up and go, hello. If you don't listen to them, that's when a Type 83 might show up. So they're a part in that role, in that graduation of we're here, we're present, we see you. Please don't make us do anything to you. Let's have tea instead. It's naval diplomacy. And cruisers are all about naval diplomacy. Why did the RN not attempt to replace the counties in pre-World War II? They look and act like deeply flawed designs, but quickly get long in the tooth. What should they have been replaced with? Well, the RN can't really replace them. One of the reasons why I think the RN holds off on replacing them is because they have a limitation on how, and as I'll get into this in the county's videos, how long they have to be in service for before they can replace them. And B, there's also the fact that while you've still got the treaties in place, can you do a 9.2-inch heavy cruiser? And the RN don't want to do another 8-inch heavy cruiser. They don't like the 8-inch gun. It doesn't really fit their needs. And that's their point. Shermack, do you think the Alaska took the form they did because the US in some ways still chasing the 6 frigates? I think the Alaskas take the form they did because the US Navy is thinking about the Japanese Navy. And again, the point is, if the Alaskas had been in service in 1942, it would be very different from the fact that when they do enter service. If they'd been in service 2 years earlier, there would be a very different World War II perspective on the Alaskas. And it might well be the Alaskas survived in service longer than the ours. No, a bit off topic. The last bilge pump upload dated from the 7/8. I don't want to put pressure on you. The team didn't break up, right? No, we haven't broken up. We're recording it tomorrow. We took a Christmas break. Jamie has kids. Drac and me have families which we spend time with at Christmas. And, it was just easier to take some time off over Christmas. And so we said we're starting season 3 in January. Actually, tomorrow, recording it. It was for the RN, because they needed more cruisers than the treaties would allow at larger sizes. If you need 80 hulls on a tonnage limit, that takes two choices. Exactly it. You need the ships to be in the places they need to be. Also, if you're going to have C class, D class, and E class in any combat assignment, then frankly, the RFUs look quite good. Alexander Simon, what if the Germans forgot about building all their cruisers and just used Mogami or Zara class cruisers built on license? Well, they'd have had far better ships, but their question is, what would they have done with them? And let's be honest, neither of those classes are exactly ships which I would want to take out into the North Atlantic, and certainly not into the Arctic. Bijan, if the Soviets had built the Stalingrad class, I think Alaska class would have been seen in a better light, being modernized. Yes? Kalgas, read the RM didn't like 8-inch gun. What's your opinion on German 21cm Scharnhorsts, Gneisenau and Blucher? It does quite well for World War One. It does well for World War One. Death Squad, how much are the Alaskas also built because Congress are given a blank check to the Navy and they could be built? Anything else that fits that concept? So many things. Sudrin 90, the real waste of money is York and Exeter. Yeah, I will agree with that. This is the thing. This is the point. Steve's attacking the RFUs and they are justifiable and quite useful and do well. If he was attacking York and Exeter, I'd probably be giving him a support. Cascadian. Hello, Cascadian. Haven't seen you in a while. Doug Clarke, what is the role of the cruiser in the modern day? Are they just supposed to be outgunned and more independent destroyers? Honestly, the cruiser in the modern day... If I was going to... Because I tend to, in the modern day, I start to referring to the Bilgewater rating system. I would say destroyers are probably your second and third rates. Frigates are usually your fourth and fifth rates. And cruisers are your first rates in terms of escorts, in terms of VLS numbers. However, in terms of also, because they're usually given those numbers of VLS because of how they're going to be used. However, and this is where it gets interesting, the reality is, and the reality we can consider, is that usually ships are called destroyers and frigates because that politically is easier. So they have to do the cruising role. So, for example, I have the Constellation class next to me. These ships are going to do the cruising role a lot. They really are. They're going to be cool on doing it a lot because of the way the system has gone for the Americans. The Burks, as good as ships they were, the design's old. They should have had a replacement running for a while. They don't. The littoral combat ships haven't been able to step up as they were supposed to. There is no replacement being put in place for the TCOs, and that was supposed to be done. So the poor Burks are having to carry everything and try and do the warfighting role. And as I was explaining earlier when talking about the Victorian Navy, there is a problem for doing that. There is a problem with trying to do everything. You end up working your ships and your people too. So I'm hoping the Constellation class will take on a lot of the diplomatic roles and duties. So the Burks can go off and, in a way, a flip round of the Royal Navy's approach of using, well, the destroyers, the smaller ships for the warfighting and the cruisers for the presence. I'm hoping the US Navy can sort of use the Constellations for the presence, and the Burks can concentrate on the warfighting. And I think that will work out very well. I'm hoping that's what they do anyway. Vision. I think the Swedish 28.3 centimeter 45 11.1 inch gun would have made a good super cruiser gun. With 12 centimeter 4.7 secondaries, and I think that would have made a good one for the Swedish. I don't think anyone else would have probably used it. It would have been interesting if Sweden had built cruisers in terms of numbers of cruisers and heavy cruisers rather than the Gotland class, which was not really that. Nice again. The rot from being the top naval power is to blame. That's good. Do you think the Taiwanese will pick up Aegis-equipped ships as they're retired? The problem with Taiwan getting Aegis-equipped ships is you have to trust that nothing unforeseen happens with that technology. Because that technology, a ship's in service not for 5 years, not for 10 years, but could be in service for 20 years. And a lot can happen in 20 years. This is the reason why Taiwan hasn't ever got it before. Also, there's the fact they'd have to have the infrastructure to support those ships and build that. So my thought process is it's unlikely. I think the Taiwanese continue on their own homegrown efforts building their own ships and probably get assistance with that. Why does the RN need a cruiser equivalent in Monday? There is no empire to police anymore, and a project power the UK does not have. Wouldn't a fleet to take over one of the CGV posts. Okay, Desert Foxo, let's go through that. Why does the RN need diplomatic presence? Well, are we still a global? If we go back to all this one. Okay. So, does Britain need to do the cruising role? Do you have a nation dependent upon maritime trade? Yep. I think the last figures were 97% by volume, 70-something% by value, went by sea. How large an exclusive economic exclusive zone do you have? Let's just check. The UK exclusive economic zone in the United Kingdom is the 5th largest in the world, measuring 6,805,586 kilometers squared. Okay, that's quite large. How big an economy do you have? Well, the UK economy is usually up there in one of the biggest in the world. Let's see. UK economy is 5th largest economy in the world, measured by the nominal gross domestic product, 10th largest by purchasing power parity, and 21st largest by GDP per capita, and constitutes 3.3% of the world's GDP. Okay, so we're kind of exposed to that. How big a population do we have? If I remember correctly, it's a few million. Let's see. UK population is 68,429,000, roughly 595, as of Tuesday, January 11th, 2022, based on World Order elaboration of the latest United Nations data. Where does your population live? All around the coast. What does your population expect from you? To not pay high taxes, but to do whenever there's a problem, to turn up and fix it. Okay, so does the Royal Navy need to maintain a cruising capability? Yes. Will they be called cruisers? Probably not, but will they do the cruiser role? Yes. That's the reality. The thing is, this ship is going to be if we're talking about it, is going to be part of the carrier battle group. It's going to be for the carrier battle group. At least 2 of them are going to be there. But they're building 8 because they need to keep 2 available for the carrier battle group, but also need to have presence, and they need to do those missions because diplomacy depends on it, because Britain's maritime trade depends on it, because if you go with just saying, okay, all we're going to do is provide the carrier battle group, and that'll mean America does everything for us, you're basically saying, America, you have to pick up all our needs for diplomacy and maritime trade protection everywhere else in the world. It doesn't work like that. Especially, it's going to sound strange. You're basically saying, okay, it's the American taxpayers who have to pay for British maritime security. That's not going to work. The British have to contribute something to the maritime security of the world because the British are just as exposed to it as the Americans. In fact, more so. So yes, the Americans will support it and probably take on the largest amount of the burden because it's in their interest to do so. But if the British don't step up and take on a significant portion, then the British lose any influence on it. That's correct. Given the UK Parliament had a Chinese spy working in for years and an MP helping, which is treason, to be fair, they couldn't really get hold of much. This is going to sound strange. You have to be a very specific member of Parliament in certain committees to get hold of information, and even then, you're probably not going to get technical data. That's political information you're going to get. which can be useful for other things, but it's a different thing from getting hold of technical data. There's far more protections on that. Unfortunately, well, fortunately or unfortunately, if you depending on your perspective, and I would say to an extent, it's probably better for democracy. You don't have some of the same restrictions on becoming an MP as you do a member of the intelligence services or a member of the armed forces, which works because people are supposed to have the freedom to choose to vote for people who stand, and as long as they don't have a criminal record and haven't been found to have actually been a spy for the for a nation, that seems perfectly fine to me. That's good. 63% of UK money financial transactions are directly linked to foreign trade. Yeah. Hello, Keskin. Oh, good to be back watching again. Been busy with college and life recently. Well, I hope you've been having fun. No, help. Wait a minute. You mean to say the UK doesn't produce the majority of the petroleum products that it requires domestically? Are you sure about that? Jonathan, Dr. C, cruiser design. Taco goes splash. Franksman, Dr. C, in World War One, the RN had to choose between their battle fleet and merchant fleet to protect with destroyers. Could this be a problem today? It could certainly be a problem in the future because there is a far less merchant ships, far less escorts. Mainly because escort strength was built on the idea that wars wouldn't last long because they go nuclear, so you didn't need the escort numbers for long-term convoy operations. Honestly, this is the point at which, if I was in charge, there's a reason why I'd be saying, well, I'd like 9 type 39, 12 type 31s and 12 type 32s, thank you very much, and 12 type 26s. So I could do that. But, I like a lot of ships. I'd possibly get 12 type 83s as well and just go 48 escorts. Woohoo! Thank you, Bishop. Cruisers in USN's New Steel Navy were orders as a frigate, Chicago, and sloops, Atlanta or Boston. 1880s, USN sloops equals RN Corvette. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. 96831. Haven't the USA been gardening our trade for decades? Yes and no. And as Alistair Shaw points out, we do take up the fence in Gulf. We tend to be an active part in it. The Americans take the lead, but we tend to be an active part in supporting it and making sure it's going. Given the current US political climate, it's also extremely unwise to base your future foreign policy and military policies around the US being a reliable ally. Not so much. America tends to be a reliable ally. They tend to come through at some point. But the point is, how do I put this? There is this old saying, God helps best those who help themselves. Alliances are better when you have power, when all powers contribute. They are stronger when all powers can contribute. When you rely on one power doing the bulk of the lifting, you are in trouble. The calm government. Taiwan getting worn out tankers. No. Maybe Aegis, sure, but I doubt tankers. Fab, so given you are showing frigates are cruisers returning to Alsatians, want of frigates? Definitely. Now, treatment, Knight. The US are now de facto maintainers of the freedom of the seas for trade as the Iron were until circa, well, I'd say circa 1950, because the US Navy. There is a problem. People go, okay, the US Navy has the larger fleet. They do. By about 1946, they had a large fleet. But they don't have the world basing and the infrastructure to take on the role. So it's actually in the 1950s the transition takes place as the Americans largely move into former British bases. If you look at it, what happens around the world is the Americans sort of move into where the British have left. And it's a transition which takes place. But the British are still doing the policing of the seas role because they have the bases and infrastructure to support it into the 1950s. And the Americans understand this, and the Americans actually support the British in doing this. This is one of the reasons why some parts of the things, for instance, the Marshall Plan and various other things, to actually support the British naval infrastructure to carry on doing that. That's good. Actually, having been an agent for a foreign government isn't as much a limp as you'd think. The last Postmaster General was a page agent under the Czech Communist government in the 80s. Fun times. Sutra 90. I'm pretty sure AUKUS shows the US under the current admin is more serious about these things. That's true. But, deterrence is a matter of presence as well. Let's put it this way. When someone's making loud noises and blustering about you turning up in places, then that means you probably had an impact. And they can't ignore you anymore. That's a good thing when it comes to diplomacy, because it means they have to talk to you. Cascading, Dr. Clarke, is it just me, or do I see parallels of the Anglo-German naval arms race in regards to China USA? Is it alarming as the US Navy as it was to the Royal Navy not old? Not really. Yes, it should, to an extent it should be, but to an extent it's also expected. As again, if we go back to this, and if we look at this criteria here, does China have a nation dependent upon maritime trade? Yep. How large an exclusive economic zone do they have? Not that big, but they keep trying to make it bigger. How big an economy do they have? Whoa. Now that's big and dependent upon global trade. How big a population do you have? A large one. Where does your population live? Let's be honest, the Chinese population, the interior is pretty empty. It's mostly up, not within ranges of the coast. And what does your population expect from you? Well, okay, that this is something which is better got into by someone who's a Sino specialist, not me. When I'm dealing with the Chinese, I tend to be focusing on the Chinese Navy. But every nation has expectations of their government, including the Chinese one. Right on, Dr. C, will you be getting to AA part of the cruiser roll? The AA part of the cruiser roll is always going to be there because aircraft are going to be there. The cruiser roll, I'll be getting to the TCOs at the end. Don't worry, the TCOs do turn up. Seriously, how exactly does that work? All I ever see is foreign politicians trying to blame every problem they have on the US to avoid responsibility. They're politicians, they're always blaming someone else to avoid responsibility. It's what they do, it's what politicians do. Blame someone else so they can avoid. It's not my fault, it's the Americans. Well, here's the point, and here's the dirty little secret. If you want an actual input into events and working out how they go, then you have to show up. Decisions are made by those who show up, not by those who pontificate from the back room. So, if you choose not to have a navy, so you can't show up, then you're going to always be pontificating from the back room. You're never going to be able to have a say in things. So, why have I brought in a fictional cruiser to talk about? Because it's rather useful. See, the Corvid class in this fictional universe, and I like Glenn because he thinks things through, and he does think through his universe very, very well. They've been shrunk down because in wartime economics it made sense. You came up with more efficient engines, more efficient design. You can make a smaller ship than their predecessors. However, this comes with a problem. And it's something that's remarked on in the book a lot. I'm not even sure if sometimes there's part of me which wonders, and I'm sure he does, but almost it's sort of subconsciously because the way he seems to inhabit the world when he's writing. The points that the people are making show the problem with shrinking a design down. This is the equivalent of the Didos versus the arrow fusers. This is the more effective warship. Dido is the more effective warship than the arrow fuser. But the arrow fuser is more effective for the diplomatic peace mission, that role. And honestly, what you want is a town class. So the thing which has even more space, because in this scenario, these ships, when they're doing diplomatic missions, the diplomats are put in the flag bridge, which A shows the status of these ships, but they go destroyers, then battle cruisers, then carriers. But honestly, it's got limited dining facilities. It's got limited spaces on board for it to do those sort of things, those diplomatic missions. And it needs them, especially if you're in a space scenario. But it's the same with a modern warship. When we're looking at this design, it's going to have more diplomatic space on it and space available, as certainly as a percentage of the ship, but actually I think possibly in cumulative area, based on some designs I've seen, than an Arleigh Burke has on it. And that's nothing against the Arleigh Burkes. The Arleigh Burkes were designed at a time at which the US Navy had the Perrys, and it had the Ticos were pretty much new, and they thought they were going to successors to them, and they had the Spruances, and they had all sorts of other ships which could do the diplomatic role. And could do the diplomacy. So that so the Arleigh Burkes could afford to turn up and be the pure warships. They could afford to be focused around the warfighting role. But the trouble is, all those ships have gone. And now everything's on the Burkes. And as good as they are, they weren't designed for the propping up peace role. They've got firepower, they're wonderful ships, but they don't have the space. They can do these things, but every time they do them, it's a little tight, it's a little complicated, it's a security nightmare, all sorts of things. And this is coming from someone who's a bit of a fan of the Arleigh Burkes. But there are limitations, because no design is ever perfect. And when they were built, they were a perfect fit for what the US Navy needed then. But they are a design which is 40 plus years old. So the Constellations are going to do it. And the Constellations have it. But this is a factor when we start talking about designs. We have to start thinking about wartime and peacetime capability. Wartime and peacetime roles. What they're supposed to be for. Sounds cool, 96 everyone. Type 46 cruiser from Against All Odds wiki. I'll look it up. Nighttime Productions, on the Marshall Plan, have you been in a position to say how that money for the UK will spend? Have you been in a position to say how that money for the UK was spent? What do? I've heard part of the using Germany overtook use economically. Post 1950s were due to investing their money into new tools for manufacturing, whereas we didn't. We tried to, but also we had. You have to remember the British Labour unit, Labour movement was very, very strong, and there was a strong fear of job reductions if you invested in new technologies, and that caused problems. And plus, honestly, if you're investing in new technologies, that means you're not building things, and both the owners and the unions didn't do either any favors. Hello, Submarine History. However, Reburks, they had to do jobs which demanded only 4,500 tons of democracy, not a full 10,000 ton work. Yeah. Anyway, let's go on to these. I love the TICOs, but the TICOs are an area air defense ship which gets the cruiser title even though they are built on a destroyer hull. Mainly because the US Navy was seeking the US Congress was seeking the status of having cruisers because the Russians were building things like although not this class particularly. They're the slightly earlier previous. And the US Navy didn't want to not. They had to be powerful against everyone, so they needed the cruisers. These were it. The trouble is, well, Alistair Shaw, I was trying to come up with a nice way of putting it, but the TICOs are fugly. You are right. They are just. There is no way of getting around it. They are powerful ships. They are well crewed. They have nice hull lines. The hull looks great. But the moment you get above the hull to the superstructure, you sit there and go, what happened? And I know the period they come from does not have a good reputation design-wise, so perhaps that's what we can blame. But and yes, there are reasons for the superstructure shaping based around supporting their radars and dealing with the weight of them and the superstructure and the top weight and all those things. I agree and I understand, but still, they always sort of remind me of the front of a VW camper. They just do. I don't know why. They do just look like a bit like a VW camper. I think it's highly unlikely, as much as I would like to see one, that we are going to get anytime soon, unless someone has a real change of heart when it comes to naming of things, a new class of ships called cruisers. Anytime soon. It's politically not viable. I'm surprised not every single warship's called a frigate. But, and I say this, if we're being sensible, that doesn't mean the cruiser has gone, because it's the cruiser role. It's the role. And yes, we can see him on the 6040. They're just the cruiser role is not going to go away. So expect the frigates to have to take up that role, expect the destroyers to have to take up that role. The cruiser roles and missions are pretty much the peacetime missions of a navy. That's the cruising role. If you consider presence, diplomacy, all these things, the cruising role covers the missions which a navy needs to do in peacetime. And so expect them to continue. And expect to see those things incorporated in those other designs. There was once a debate on bilge pumps. I forget which episode it was in, and I forget it might have actually been one of the episodes which didn't actually manage to record properly. But we had a debate, and the discussion was whether every ship now built is a cruiser. And I think the end up discussion was yes, they are all cruisers. We just don't call them cruisers. There's the light ASW cruiser and the heavy AA cruiser. They're all supposed to do the cruising role, but one of them's called a destroyer and emphasizes the air defense role, and one of them's called a frigate and does the anti-submarine warfare role. And it's also one of the interesting things. When I have debates with people about the idea of the heavy cruiser, if it had been an actual proper thing from the Washington Navy Treaty, if they had set the capital ship limit to the 40,000 tons, the carrier limit to 30,000 tons, and the heavy cruiser limit to 20,000 tons, the light cruiser to 10,000 tons, destroyer limit to 2,000 tons, just to round them up and have those tonnages limited, what the differences would have been. I can honestly see the RN still wandering around about the 8,000 ton mark for their light cruisers, because they'll want them as many numbers as possible. I could also see them wandering around the 18,000 ton mark for their heavy cruisers, because they'll get the numbers. Because that means for if they've got if they've got a limit of, I don't know, for every what's the figure would go? So 9 times 18 or 9 times 20. 9 times 20 is 180,000. So for every 180,000 tons of cruiser, you could get 10 ships rather than 9. The RN could well do that. And let's be honest, the differences between a 20,000 ton cruiser and an 18,000 ton cruiser are not going to be enough to write home about. Especially not if you manage to get 10 for every 9, so you can keep 4 available versus 3. Which you probably can do, especially if your limit is, I don't know. If I was setting that limit, I'd probably be setting it in the limit of you're going to be allowed 18, so probably 360,000 tons. At which point, for 18,000 tons, I could have 20 cruisers, and you could have 18. You could have 18 20,000 ton cruisers. I could see them doing that, but that wasn't the way the world went, and we now have these. And you also have to remember the Ticos, the Burks, they are war builds. Yes, the Cold War didn't go. How to put it? The Cold War went plenty hot, depending on where you were in the world, but it never went hot between the major powers directly on the naval front. And although it was getting pretty aggressive below the waves and pretty aggressive above the waves on occasion, but the reality is war doesn't break out like that. They don't have to fight a war like that. But they're building for a war. They're building as if they're in a war. And I would say this is a design where its warfighting has been the emphasis over its role. And I would say the same happened with the Burks. Warfighting was the primary concern. And it should be the primary concern, but promoting peace also has to be a concern. basically you have to design in, work out what you need for its warfighting role, and then you have to design the hull to an extent, the spacing around also being able to promote peace. You need to go right, and I need these capabilities and this stuff. Boom, boom, boom for my warfighting role. Good. Right, let's look about promoting peace. Right then. Well, we need these weapons. We need these defenses. Okay, we're going to need to sort of spread these out a bit. We need to put in some space. We need to put in some direct lines of travel so we can easily get people from one entertaining space to another entertaining space without them having easy access to anywhere sensitive. Why? Because you don't want to have armed guards everywhere during a party. You want to be able to have simple bottlenecks that you can put the armed guards at. That will stop people going anywhere they're not supposed to, but preferably not so a case that every 5 meters. Type 23s get around by this because you go onto that lovely space between the two bits of superstructure, and if you turn towards the stern, you can go, of course, on various routes, but you can also go for a little bit of a stretch straight into the hangar, a little bit of a passageway, or you can turn towards the bow and go for another passageway, and you can quickly reach a wardroom. It works fine. But the thing is, you don't have to go down, you don't have to go up. You're not going a long way around the ship, and it's quite easy if you're in the wrong depth for someone to go, "Oh, are you lost? Let's get you out of here." They're even lose in the right place. These things are not expensive, but they take time and force and justification. And they're important to a cruiser role. Alex, so you're saying the Burks are older today than Dreadnought was at the outbreak of World War II? Well, then she would have been at the outbreak of World War II. Let's see. If I remember correctly, the Burke design. Okay. USS Arleigh Burke, laid down 1988, launched 1989, commissioned 1991. So it's been in service 31 years. The design process started in late 1970s, went through several iterations, at which point you have, this is why I say it's a 40-year design. It's basically that the design has been going on since at least 1982, and it's now 2022. So yeah, the design and concept of the Burks is older, but let's be honest, if we're being honest in terms of construction, the Dreadnought is a bit of an extreme example because it's built so quickly, although we can claim its concept was a little bit older than it was, so 1903. But 36 years were from the Dreadnought concept in 1903, if we go for that one, to World War II. The Burks have been in service 31 years this year, since Arleigh Burke entered service. And as we can assume the construction and process started, as I said, it's dated from the 1970s is where I would date it, but some people will date it from the mid 1980s. If we, let's say we start off with 1984, which is not a bad year to start off with, we are at 37 years. 38 years in 2022. So yeah, the Arleigh Burke has been in service and design has been on process longer than the exact elapse between the conception of Dreadnought and World War II. Sorry, so what happened in that is that they wanted to save money by reusing existing hull design and stuffing two large blocks on top. If the hull was tailor-made for Ticos, would be 1/3 shorter in the superstructure. Um, Honestly, I'd say if the hull was tailor-made for Ticos, I'd reckon that should be bigger because they'd probably carry more VLS. HMS Dreadnought was 12 years. Well, hang on. No, when 1914 start, she was World War One to World War One. HMS Dreadnought was 9 years old and out of date, pretty much by 1914. You're talking to World War Two rather than World War One. For peacetime, do you think that making a diplomatic module that could be replaced with a weapons module would be feasible and make sense? Not really, considering your diplomatic module would consist of a entertaining space and a galley. It's far easier to build in spaces which are multi-use spaces. If you can turn your hangar or a flex deck into an entertaining space or a diplomatic mission space, you can turn a wardroom if it's sufficiently designed. It's not so much needing an actual module. It's basically going, okay, Queen Elizabeth class carriers, good example. They've got a pub on board. People go, why have they got a pub on board? It's a brilliant entertaining space for bringing people for a diplomatic chat. It can be turned into a conference room in comfy chairs and nice tables. They can also do the same in a hangar. If you go around the daring class, you find these wardroom spaces, which again are designed so they can be quickly reconfigured. So the thing is, don't think of diplomatic space as something you have to add in. It's not a module you have to add in. It's a case of the spaces you're already building on your ship anyway for your operation, you apply some thought to. With your galley, okay, yes, we're designing it round supporting the crew primarily, but factor in a bit more preparation space, a little bit extra space. They can do formal dinners. You have to make it slightly bigger, slightly more spacious, but you can do that. It's not a case of something massive that has to be added in. It's a case of taking what's already there and just thinking it through so it can deal with a few more people. Mm-hmm. Taxpayers don't want to pay for diplomacy. They don't understand what relationship management gets them. It's an issue. It needs to definitely be demonstrated. It needs to be far more explained and shouted about. 290. I remember being aboard HMS Ocean for a party. It was pretty well contained to a part of hangar. Mm-hmm. Alexander, the Cold War was weird. It was just two factions making better and bigger toys, fighting in regional conflicts between their mates. Once they actually they had mutually assured distractions sorted out. Sort of. Yes, I did get the link you sent. I think the link is to do with the Type 46, which you talked about earlier. And yeah, I've seen it. Hmm. Sounds cool. I'd love to see a design of those actually. Sure. Do you think we're getting to a plateau like the Age of Sail plateau with 100 years of old ships being used on service? I don't think we're quite getting to that plateau, but yeah. Vision, old ships in World War II were a lot younger than many of the warships in today's navies. Well, especially in some navies. There's a Vox. Has anyone gotten a class of cruiser truly wrong for its role? Not the US Navy, Royal Navy, or IJN, really, although I do have serious problems with the aviation cruisers. For their role, yeah, not wrong, but I'd say actually the concept itself is entirely wrong. George Newman. All 92. US carriers have cinemas. They're good. This is Foxo. Has the rate of naval development slowed down from the earliest research, given that the hulls have stayed viable on the front line for 30 years? But you wouldn't get that with a battleship battlecruiser. Well, the thing is, if you consider it, what do we now spend our time changing? The Type 23s have been stowed for a few years. What have they had changed? Their whole electronics fits and their missiles. You couldn't do that so much for battleship and battlecruiser. And also, let's be honest, the Type 23s have had a completely new hull build. So, yeah, there is disparateness in there. That's good. Most diplomacy is such that it won't work if you make it publicly open to too much scrutiny. The difference between what politicians say was agreed and what was actually agreed would be problematic. Oh, yeah. That public nature of Queen is pretty much a successful way to challenge the concept of Semper Fi and make US Marine Explorer aboard think rethink this whole revolution thing. I thought that was just by sending the Queen to have a visit with them. Operation 13. Hello, Dr. Clarke. Redeployment spaces. Have you looked at the area class PGs of the USN Pride of World War II? Well, for Gander, if you haven't looked at them, I have looked at them and they are very good and well designed for it. The USN does get it when they have the money for it. But diplomacy works best when the power is understated. Anox just put mailed fist inside a silk glove. Here's the thing, and this is why I like the Galaxy class cruisers from Star Trek for diplomacy, naval diplomacy. Right? You have all these spaces, and I'll be finishing off soon because it's been 3 hours and I don't want to take over your entire evenings. You have all these diplomatic spaces. But the thing is, when you're on them and you're in this big space and you're thinking, wow, this is a big ship. This crew are smart, they're well dressed, they're eloquent, they're talking to me politely, and they've got this lovely space. So if this is what their entertaining space is like, what's their warfighting space like? Is probably just the same standard? Let's be honest, I'd be foolish if I presumed it wasn't. And that's it, really. It's a case of, we can't show you our weapons and stuff because that's secure. But let's give you a good party. Let's show you give you some good food. And let's have conversation. Let's take, these days, selfies next to the big forward gun. And seriously, if you have ever been, you have never lived until you have watched diplomats and local dignitaries and everything taking selfies of themselves next to the forward gun soda bridge, especially if it's at night and it's lit up and there's stars above and they're just taking the selfie and, you know, everyone's grouping in underneath the gun going, yeah, gonna get the gun in. Or a nice sailor, you have a couple of smartly dressed sailors there and they go, oh, sir, would you like us to help? Do you want us to take a photo for you? And they take the photo and everyone's going, big gun. And again, if you're a naval officer or a naval, actually, let's be honest, naval geeks as well, we'd just the same, but over a big gun. But the point is that impresses, and that has an impact on these days on social media. All things to multiply that impact. It looks good, it looks professional, and it looks cool. If you want to have a look, every time HMS Montrose has hosted an event in the Far East, look at the amount of selfies which turn up on Twitter of people posing next to that 4.5 gun. Just watch out for it. It's brilliant. Type 83 idea hasn't been published yet. No, it will be soon. Right then, what have we got coming up? Well, as you know, we have a lot of cruiser long patrols coming. We've had the Kent class counties. We've had the Nautilus class. I can tell you now that pretty much, barring 2 of the counties, they're all currently recorded. 2 of the counties are going to be re-recorded. For the counties, Pluton is written, not been recorded yet. Adventure class is written, not been recorded yet. And the Brahma class has been written, but not recorded yet. But they're all coming up, and I'm still taking suggestions for the 29th of March, the 31st of May, the 30th of August, and the 29th of November. And, well, you're going to know what I go do with the suggestions when they get published. There's going to be surprises. Vision. British ships are in ships on Twitter or are always posting about diplomatic visits and events. Hangar pad that gets used a lot in temporary climates. Yes. As sure, 5-inch guns count as a big gun. They do today. Frank Swanner, dot C. Will Baltimore Alaska's be on this list? Well, at the moment, in US cruisers, we've got Brooklyn class. We've got the Portland class. We have got the New Orleans class, the Northampton class, the Pensacola class. We haven't got the Baltimores yet, or the Alaskas. I might add them in. There is all sorts of things which might turn up in December. There's the Foxo. Given the Navy's reliance on diplomacy for doing its job, how much of an effect did the Navy and Pax Britannia have on the development of the modern diplomat? Humongous. There's a reason why, for many, many years, the British diplomat was quite often a former naval officer. That there are a huge number of Royal Naval officers went into the diplomatic corps because they already had the training. Right. So, thank you very much, everyone. The Patreon vote is still live. Still waiting to see what votes come in for the Patreon vote. And thank you, everyone, for watching. Okay. I will update now that the bilge pumps has been delayed to being recorded on Saturday because Jamie Jamie's looking after his daughter tomorrow. So that's fine. But I'm just confirming we will be recording bilge pumps on Saturday, and that will be the first episode of the new year. I hope, please, if there are topics you would like us to cover, because we haven't, as it's going to be on Saturday, we haven't finalized the topic list, tweet at us and include all 3 of our handles in it and say bilge pumps season 3 ideas. Just tweet at us whatever you want us to, whatever you think. And if we get the tweets before we start recording, which will be usually 1100 hours on Saturday morning, we will know. Okay. Right, and as you all know, for the cruisers, there is a post on the community page of the YouTube channel, which has the cruiser list and has, please put suggestions there. So go put the suggestions there. That'll be what I'll be looking through and making my judgments based on that. Right. Endurance, before you go, I'm having trouble running Ultimate Admiral Dreadnought on my laptop. How do you set that up on yours? I got it running. Luckily, I've got a fairly decent laptop, thanks to Drac. But how do I put it? I find I don't try to run anything else when I'm running it, because otherwise it isn't happy with me. And I have to admit, I got the beta version. I downloaded directly from them, and now I've got it updating, and now I've got it connected into my Steam account, so I get the updates through Steam. How that helps. Thank you, thank you, Sean. And the calm guys word. Please, SMS. I'm not. Yes, I know. Thank you, John Shea. Thank you, Derp Squad. Thank you, DG40. Thank you, Alfie Rowe, Knight 6831. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Sean Mack. Thank you, Juicy June. Thank you, Dan Freeman. And all my lovely analysts. Thank you, Steve Winish. Thank you, Mama 6240. Thank you, Just P. Thank you, Andy PWR. 2 sheds on a destroyer hull. Andy, I didn't notice you pop in earlier. Thank you. Thank you, Desert Foxo. All right. Thank you, Atros Ford. Thank you, Frank Spalato. Thank you, everyone. Jonathan Burrow. Thank you, Matasad Lavik. Anthony Ellis Shaw. Jonathan Burrow. Thank you. Thank you, Alfie Rowe. Thank you for Carl Godsberg. And thank you, Vision. Thank you, everyone who's being admin this evening. Thank you all for your hard work. And hope you have fun. Discord for build troll suggestions. You can also do it on Discord if you want to put it on Discord and tag in me. All 3 of us are on my Discord. I'm not sure if Jamie's on Drax, but he's on mine. So you can tag us in on Discord or you can tag us in on Twitter. We'll take them either way. Andrew, I run UAD on minimum settings with nothing else running and still had trouble. It does really. It's a RAM speed I found with the UAD. I tried it on another computer, which is actually theoretically on paper better than my laptop, and it didn't like it because it doesn't have the same RAM speed. Take care, everyone. Thank you very much, and thank you, Walt92. Byron, thank you. Take care. Poodle Avengers!